All right, everyone, I'm just getting set up here, just about ready to go, I think.
Rick.
I think he's setting up.
Okay, welcome everyone to, oops, I need to record. Sorry about that. We need to start over. And that didn't work either. I didn't share the sound properly. So I got to restart it once again here. I'll end the recording and restart it. Okay, we'll try once again. And it's still not working. Okay, there's a problem with the audio apparently. Okay, bear with me another few minutes while I sort out the usual production problems as we begin here. So just be a couple of minutes. Okay, can I just get a sound check there from anybody in our participants so we can see if the sound is working? Oh,
Working.
it's working, it's working. Yay,
Yes.
Thank you. All right, step one completed. Now, fingers crossed, and we'll try it once again here. Okay, welcome everyone. It took a while to get here, but here we are. Welcome to the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group for Wednesday, October 31st, 2018. And we had a fancy intro put together by Flint. Thank you, Flint, for that. Nice to have some fast music and a little bit of a jazzy beginning there. And okay, I'll probably get my video started here and we can begin the show. there we are, and just have to get the camera focused properly. Okay, that should do. Okie dokie. Yes, welcome everyone to the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group. So here we are gathered once again on Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever it happens to be in your part of this lovely planet. Gathered to speak of things of the plasma realm primarily. And of course, we diverge into a number of different topics in this particular class, it seems. But we always seem to come around to tying it into part of what we call the plasma teachings, primarily, which is put forward by the Keshe Foundation and Mr. Keshe. And we're thankful for that that information and knowledge that's been passed down to us that we work with here. So, as usual, I ask at the beginning if anyone has something they'd like to offer for today's show, some sort of project or other things that they've been working on the last while. And usually lean on Lee to begin the show. I'm wondering if you get anything to start with today, Lee. Not hearing the microphone from you there, Lee. I don't know if it's at my end or your end.
Not coming through?
Oh, now I hear you.
Okay, so I just I don't having the show this week because, well, Mr. Keshe sort of poo-pooed the idea of doing those copper coils for that project, and I'm not sure whether my copper rings fall under that or not, and it's going to cost about $500 to buy copper for the rings, so I'm sort of putting that project on hold until I
that's a
feel
lot
more
of
confident that I'm going to get a positive result when I build it. So
a lot of heavy metal to invest in. That's right.
Yeah, so so I'm sort of just holding back and seeing what others are doing.
Yeah, I'm finding myself in a difficult position too. I'm still got my sheet of copper here, which is a lovely piece of material as far as that goes, and it I've noticed it actually works pretty good as a singing saw kind of thing, if you can learn how to play it, of course, which I haven't, but it's got a really nice tone to it. But what it should be is cut into discs. I didn't want to use a hole cutting saw because it's pretty thin material, even though it's thicker than most of the sheet kind of copper you get. But it's a little thin for rotating hole saw, that cuts a single line as it goes around with its tip. And I would think it would dig in and maybe cause a mess. And it's even hard to drill through because the drill bit likes to grab into it and make the hole not round and things like that. I've noticed when I made the disc for my little turbine here, it was hard I had to end up hammering the disc back together because they warp so much in just trying to cut the holes. So what I wanted to do is just get it water jet cut, so I can have larger discs, a series of discs cut out with a proper center hole that I wanted to have, and get it all laid out and so on. But
I had to clamp the copper between two sheets of plywood and then do the
yes,
hole saw, but I I was only using a 4-inch hole saw. You go any bigger
Just
than
do
that,
it
you
a
can't do it.
4-inch with the teeth on it, that kind of hole saw.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
without the clamp between the plywood, it wouldn't have worked for sure.
Yeah, that's what I'd have to do with the other rotating one too, and it would I'd have to have a circular clamped piece of plywood or something made up, a special jig and so on, and it would still probably mess up. So, and
Yeah.
then they have to finish the edges and make everything true and do that in the lathe and whatnot, which I did with these discs. I drilled them out and put them on, stacked them up on the lathe, and it's a woodworking lathe, but it was fine just with a tool to shave the discs when they're rotating, and or you can use a grinder as well while they're rotating to make them all true and even when they're in the jig, basically. And that's the way Tesla did it to balance his Tesla turbines that were made out of, the discs were made out of a special German silver steel or silver um, alloy of some sort, which was the strongest at that time, back in the early 1900s. And he would rev them up, a disc a little bigger than this, about a 6-inch disc turbine with, I think he had 12 or 15 discs or something in that one. And he would rev it up to 35,000 RPM at that time, which is pretty significant. And he wanted to even take it further, but the materials couldn't handle the stress at that time. We have better materials today, but it's still one of the limits of these spinning systems is to make everything true. So what he would do is, if this was an example of one of the discs, he would stack all the discs on a lathe or on a rotating arbor of some sort. And while it was rotating, he would use a grinder to grind at the same time as it was rotating. And that would make all the discs the same across, so they were all consistent, and it would grind such that they were true to the center. And he said he had no problems with them, with vibration and so on at high speeds when he used that technique. So that's kind of interesting. And that's part of the Tesla turbine stuff that we've kind of touched on a few times here. Yes, Jay, that is a steampunk Tesla turbine chop saw on my desk, now that you mention it. And that was part of my trick or treat costume some years ago. I was going to bring up some of that, but I don't have that readily available right now. But I can show you briefly what this beastie thing was. This is a steampunk Tesla turbine saw. You can see the saw blade here. Okay. It's a skill saw blade. And it's a Tesla turbine inside here. That's what the guts are made out of. But it's special because it's a magnetic Tesla turbine. Tesla's original turbine wasn't magnetic, nor did he have a skill saw blade attached to it. And this is an actual, in spite of it being held together with hot glue, lots of hot glue, many tubes of hot glue. This is the exhaust outlet here. This is the inlet here for the air compressor to put pressure in. And so the idea is that the air pressure goes in through this, I guess I gotta get sort of here. The air pressure goes in through this tube, goes into the turbine chamber inside here, which is a CD a CD ROM box. They call it a cake box, a plastic box that the CDs come in. That was the basis for this this whole wild device. And then, by the way, it's functional, totally functional, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So the idea, though, that's special about this is it's got a little wing nut here that I made out of a toonie Canadian dollar, or sorry, a loonie Canadian dollar. And it's just got this is the little shaft that goes in the center, and this whole thing comes out. It's a skill saw blade, as you can see, and it's got some magnets attached here. These bigger pads are simply Teflon pads for sliding, but the magnets are attached in 6 places here. And the magnets, if you would look sideways, you see there's a series of discs there. 1, 2, 3. You see three main discs here. And there's magnets. The magnets go in between the discs. So there's magnets that separate each of the discs, and they're attached to the skill saw blade. And it's all held together very securely by crazy glue, because it's a crazy contraption. This is part of what enabled me to get the reputation of crazy Mr. Fix-It Rick on one of the gadget blogs, a popular gadget blog quite a few years ago, and about 10 years ago now, actually. So back to the actual turbine, which is interesting because, yeah, actually, this is not, that was just the magnetic part of the apparatus. I've forgotten here. This is the actual turbine was inside here. See, it even says turbine on there, so it must be. And you can see the magnets inside of the turbine as well there. There's 6 magnets that go around in the inside discs of the turbine. I think there was 6 discs, actually. If I had that on there. I don't think so. I believe it was 6 discs that I used inside of this case. And again, they're separated by magnets. So what happens is when the magnets of this blade here engage the magnets of the turbine through this plastic case, it's just the fields that are interacting. There's no mechanical interaction with this disc here. And it actually, I can feel the magnetics as it goes into place here. It's kind of, and it actually slips into place, but you got to force it, it finds its position, and it snaps right into where it should be there. And it actually can be run without its little central pin here. This is the safety pin for this unit, though, that because you don't want to have this come flying off at the wrong moment. But I have it designed. This is one of my claims to fame, I guess you might say. I discovered inadvertently through the first time I ran this this crazy device with a skill saw blade just sitting loosely on top of the case, and I ran it at high speeds with high air pressure, and I thought that the blade would, it was kind of a joke. I thought it would just fall off and that would be it. Oh well. But instead it engaged, the magnets actually engaged in such a way that they went supersonic, and the thing went spinning at very high speeds. The air compressor kicked in, and it went up to probably over 10,000 RPM, and it was pretty wild. What I discovered was that the magnets, these magnets are all, say, north. I believe it's north up, so they're all facing north, these 6 magnets. Well, these 6 magnets are also facing north. So when I put them together, it's north against north, and it would actually repel. I don't know if you can see, but if I try to put it together, it'll actually move the inside disc from repelling. There it goes. That's in repel mode, not attracting. The magnets are repelling. So when it slips in together, the magnets are repelling. They look sort of like this if the magnets are north facing this way and the other ones are north facing the other way. It's in repelling mode, so they won't go together, but they will go in between each other. So instead of going, if they were attracted, they would go together like this. But they're not attracted, they're repelled, so you can't get them to form there. They will go chunk, slipping right in between like little gear cogs. And they have a neutral position there where they're not attracted to the other magnets and they're not repelled. They're like caught in between. And that's the beauty of it, is this whole apparatus can rotate with the magnetic fields caught in between. There's no interaction of the physicality, just the fields. And these fields will interact such that you don't even really need a central axle or a shaft, and it'll actually run at high speeds with the interaction of the two repelling magnets. This was the strange thing about it, and I discovered this by having, at first I had the magnets in attracting mode. That's what I figured would work. You'd have them attracted each other, put them together, and it should be able to rotate on top of the case with the air pressure going through and so on. But it didn't work. There's way too much resistance, too much friction. It was attracting mode, everything jammed up. So I just, for fun, I reversed it, because that's what I often do. If something doesn't work, try the opposite, because maybe just out of a fluke it will. So I did the opposite, put the magnets opposite, put it in, and it kind of engaged into place, kind of loosely and crazily. And I fired up the air compressor, and sure enough, they just engaged. And this disc went whipping around at high speed, and I freaked out basically and started screaming. And I couldn't shut off the air compressor because I had to jump across where this was rotating in order to turn off the air compressor. And it's wailing away, and this thing's wailing away, and I'm screaming away. And yeah, that was the first video of all of this Tesla turbine thing. You got to realize that this little turbine here is made strictly with CD discs and magnets and a CD case, all plastic and magnets. There's no metal parts other than the stuff I added just for decoration more than anything else for Halloween, because it was a Halloween sort of joke at the time. And then once I got it all operating, I put it together on a weekend and just worked on it, got it all working and for Halloween. And I had a black costume with a black hood, and it was really scary. And the scariest thing was running this, because I actually ran it, and it might be good to run it just for Halloween. Maybe I'll show a little excerpt from that video. I'll have to find it here first. If anybody wants to make any comments about my insanity, they can go ahead at this moment. So, like I kind of say, sometimes we diverge in this group a little bit, but it does come around. There's a method to the madness, so to speak. And see, there it is. Okay, just give me a minute to, I have to let this ad play through. Right, okay, so let me just get that lined up here. And sound optimize. Okay, should be able to, just a minute here. Should be able to see that there now, I think. Let me get the live stream zeroed in. Okay, this little video I called the Tesla CD turbine. That's what the device is called, the Tesla CD turbine. Pumpkin cutting ceremony. And so I'll just show some excerpts out of it because it's almost 9 minutes long altogether, and I should have had the short version, but suffice to say that well, I'll just kind of show part of this entity. Okay, here we are at the pumpkin cutting ceremony. The Tesla Turbine Steampunk Edition with special editions of brass fittings and of course the laser sighting system for precise cutting, and also for being able to put a little happy face on the actual item you're cutting. And also we have this extension here which makes things so much more safe. The handhold extension as far as a skill saw blade on a CD container goes. And this breaks down as well. Allow me to demonstrate where this comes apart. Very simply, this comes off, and that blade is held in with magnets. Isn't that clever? See? The blade doesn't actually need it. It's pretty stable, but I put this on to keep folks at home a little less nervous about my fingers and other body parts. Believe me, I'm more interested in the other body parts. Okay, let's give it a try. Laser's on, and we're going to see what we can do here. I'm going to put on my safety glasses. In fact, it's a whole safety helmet. Okay, here we go. You gotta realize at this point that I have never tried this unit on an actual pumpkin or anything else at this point. It's strictly experimental, and I'm very nervous, as I should be. I don't think I would have done that again if I, in retrospect. But anyway, here we go. We're going to carry on here. So far, so good. Got all my fingers and other body parts too. No blood and only a few tears from the pumpkin. Yeah, oh, that's basically it. So it ends up after 10 minutes or so of hacking away at this pumpkin that it's more or less a Halloween pumpkin, but it's, let's say it's not one of the better looking pumpkins that you'll find, but not many are made with a skill saw blade either. So anyway, I thought that was interesting in terms of this Tesla turbine idea, which I brought up before, simply because it's disks, and that's basically all that's in the Tesla turbine. It's a series of disks with gaps in between, and the gaps are the secret that makes the unit work. And it picks up on the adhesion of the flowing fluids, whether it's water, air, or combination of both, or other fluids, and so on, and ends up delivering power. And it's also interesting that the original Tesla turbine could run on virtually any fuel, anything from gases like propane or methane to it'll run on oats or wheat, the chaff from oats and wheat, or wood chips, and any kind of oil or gasoline or other types of fuels as well. So it's an interesting device if those of you want to follow that line of reasoning. But of course, in this group, we try to think of things more plasmatically, which when you get into the Tesla turbine and its ultimate incarnation, you could say, it does end up being a plasmatic device. And that's what I try to work with it. And that's what I wish to do with my cutting out of the copper discs and that whole copper disc idea, to have a magnetic and well, gravitational as well, because gravitational happens when rotation happens. So magnetic gravitational turbine for use, and also nano-coated, nano-layered surfaces, and with a plasmatic interaction going on inside. So anyway, that's it on that video. Any questions about that, or anything you want to know?
Rick, that was pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Cruel or cool?
Bit of both.
Cruelty to pumpkins, maybe. But it was, I took a chance at that time because, number one, I was focused on getting the Tesla name out. I had a goal in my life at that time that I was so taken by the Tesla image in his life, the story of his struggle, the story of his great inventions, and all of his life that he went through. And that invigorated me. I wanted everyone to know about that here's, the possibly, or what could be argued, the greatest inventor of the 20th century. And he's kind of been lost in the dust. And why is that? Why is he not remembered in the history books? Well, you got to realize that his main competitor was actually producing the history books, had owned the companies for the printing presses and all of the PR and all of the educational systems and so on. And it didn't include Tesla and all that. That was not part of the learning at that time, and still isn't primarily. But now, since 10 years ago, when I was playing around on the internet and dealing with the Tesla phenomenon and trying to make it I wanted to make the Tesla name a household name. That was my goal. And I thought the Tesla turbine would be an ideal way to do that, as well as the Tesla coil, of course. And that became a phenomenon. A lot of people still experiment with Tesla coils and all that. But you have to realize that in spite of the Tesla coils and all the other Tesla 600 Tesla inventions, Tesla, what he called his greatest invention was his Tesla turbine. That's what he unveiled on his 50th birthday. And that, he thought, was going to be the ultimate power supply for not only the cars and trucks, and he claimed it would replace all of the heat engines of the world at that time. That means anything that ran on any fuel, including the steam engines, the internal combustion engines, all of the heat engines, because his design was more efficient and simpler to make, and very, very basic compared to all the parts and all the technical stuff that's required for most internal combustion or other combustion type engines. And he truly believed that this device was going to revolutionize the world. And in fact, he made a statement that it would turn all of the heat engines of the world into a pile of scrap. And the professor that he was talking to at the time said, he walked out and just muttered that would be a very big pile of scrap, he said. And the shock of this, this major upsetting of all the plans of the industrials at that time to make these steam engines, and then progress into the internal combustion engines and the diesel engines, and to use them in vehicles, because it used lots of heavy materials, and it used the fuels they wanted to use, and it used the technologies they wanted to get into, the proprietary technologies and whatnot. And so Tesla was not sponsored, or there was tests made in different organizations invested briefly into the technology, but instead there were other turbines developed, the bladed turbines, which became all the technology and science, became the science behind the bladed turbines, and the high temperature with the blades and the materials used, and literally billions and billions of dollars have been put into research and development of the bladed turbines, but very, very little put into the non-bladed disc turbine of Tesla. And so I thought that would be a good idea to try to introduce that into the world. And then I had the revelation of combining magnets onto the discs, so that when the discs rotated, they rotated magnets, and then you could actually get power directly from the rotating magnetic field that was created from the rotating magnets in between the discs. Seemed like a natural. And then I found out that you could actually rotate the discs without a center shaft and bearings that was required on most turbines. And so I eliminated the shaft, the bearings, and the seals on the original Tesla turbine, and made it into a magnetic motor instead of just a rotating shaft that usually went to a generator, a separate generator, and all of that. But it never flew, and but my idea was not to patent it, but to get it out into public so that no one else can patent it, and that it could be used. Anyone could develop it, anyone could revolutionize the world with it. I thought that would be a great idea, but like I say, it never flew, literally. And so it still has potential to. I think it has lots of potential, but several years ago, I guess around 8 years ago, seven years ago or something like that, I ran across the Keshe technology and Mr. Keshe's videos, and all these concepts then fell into place and really made sense to me. and the other concepts of the matter level rotating from, because you have to have a motive source for, you have to have some kind of pressure going into this unit. And you have to have a lot of pressure. This takes a full pressure from a decent sized air compressor to keep this cutting. And it'll, you know, barely cut a pumpkin at that rate. But if it was set up properly and efficient, then yes, it would be proper. But it takes water pressure, air pressure, some kind of pressure in order to do that. And that takes different kinds of motors and there's different kinds of fuel sources and so on to run all that. So it wasn't a solution, because you're still burning fuels in order to make the disks rotate and to get your magnetic field and so on. It seemed to me that a reactor with that could rotate and create its own fields was a much better way to go about things and create its own magnetic fields and own other fields that could be useful, and not to mention creating new materials. And of course, the biggest one of creating lift. That was what the ultimate goal was for me, even beyond the Tesla, all the other Tesla stuff. Because back at that time, I also became part of what's called the Tesla's flying machine group. And that was formed with Bill Lynn, William Lynn, L-Y-N-E, who I've mentioned before. Who's got a couple of books, Pentagon Aliens and Occult Ether Physics, Tesla's Hidden Space Propulsion System, and the Conspiracy to Conceal It. And there's lots of, he does a lot of research into the situation around the end of the Second World War in the 1940s and 50s and what was going on, and how they actually did a lot of experiments at that time with gravity. And they, you know, this whole idea of anti-gravity or lift was becoming quite common actually in the 50s. And then suddenly in the 60s and 70s, everything sort of went quiet. And you hear about some of these, you know, black programs and that kind of thing, but you didn't hear about in the public about the idea of lift and the idea of anti-gravity, except in science fiction. So back to the Tesla turbine and Tesla's 50th birthday, he was very happy because he had this twin 200 horsepower Tesla turbine that he unveiled on his 50th birthday. Ran on virtually any fuel. It was lightweight, and you know, this was great. It could have been used in the vehicles at that time and so on. But he was already refused by Ford from the Model T and so on. He could have used a nice Tesla turbine instead of the Model T engine, but Tesla kind of booted Ford out of his lab and said he didn't want to join his industrial group and whatnot. So they went separate ways, apparently. But what I want to get back to is Tesla's turbine, his 200 horsepower turbine. The reason why it was so important to him was for his Tesla's flying machine. So what flying machine? Well, that's the whole thing about it. Tesla had a design and apparently built, according to certain sources, an actual flying machine that had no wings, no flaps or ailerons, they're called, on the wing, no wings, no ailerons, no airbags, meaning no hydrogen or helium lift, and it could maintain its positive positioning in spite of any wind. I thought, oh, this is pretty mind-boggling. How could it be made if that's the description of it? That's not something that's it has no propellers. There's no wing. There's no propellers, wings, or anything like that on it. So this is a positive positioning device that maintains according to the fields around it, obviously, because if it was had propellers or whatever, then in a wind, it's always a big problem with propeller type machines maintaining stability in the wind and whatnot. Helicopters still have trouble with that. They always have to correct for the side winds and whatnot. So Tesla's got this concept that he announced and described it, how it works on a veritable rope of air. Like basically it's a twisting toroidal field that he's able to connect to that supports and takes this machine where he wants to go. Well, back to the Tesla turbine. So he's got this 200 horsepower turbine, and he mentions that there's 5 of his inventions that are used in his flying machine. It required the intelligent use of all of these devices. So the Tesla turbine was number 1. It provided the motive force, what's called the motive force, or the turning effect. Basically, you run it on fuel and you've got a shaft that comes out that turns. That turning shaft is attached to a high frequency, high voltage, or at least high frequency generator alternator. That's the second part. Is Tesla was big on making alternators and special ones for special jobs. So you've got 2 of his items right there, the Tesla turbine and the Tesla electrical motor. So he had this huge power electrical motor powering electronic gear to produce the fields of his device. So other parts of the gear would be Tesla coil and possibly 2 types of coil. We've got the normal little Tesla coil. I've got a miniature one here, for example. This is a tiny little one, and usually you have a little sort of ball on the top of the Tesla turbine. It's usually a metal, or sorry, the Tesla coil, usually a metal ball, and it gives off fields, and you can light incandescent bulbs and so on from it, or fluorescent bulbs and that kind of thing. We've all seen that before, the Tesla coils. So you have a Tesla coil, but you also have the Tesla pancake coil, which is a flat, specially wound bifilar flat coil, which Tesla in his patent for that mentions that it had a special purpose of which you won't comment on in this patent. And so he left it kind of mysterious. What was this special purpose? And I believe it ties into his flying machine. That was one of the main devices that's able to convert this enormous energy from his turbine and his electric motor. And then he's got these 2 sets of coils, that the normal Tesla coil, which is a high voltage, basically it's like a DC, interrupted DC current, usually has a spark gap that sparks and sends a DC, which is attached to part of this apparatus, this called a saucer, because it seems like the close to, if not the same types of fields that would be generated in order to generate lift. If you're going to have positive positioning, and it has to be the same principles involved. So you might be able to generate those fields from different methods, everything from physicality, rotating stuff, to rotating plasmas, and maybe beyond to just the fields themselves. And, it depends how far you want to take it. So he's got these devices, and there's one other part of his 5 items. I believe it's what's called the Tesla tube, which is a special tube he made with a hemisphere of aluminum with an electrode in the middle. It's insulated, and it's an open-ended tube that's able to project a beam. And I believe he was able to project a beam and go very fast at the along that beam, essentially, is like a veritable rope of air. You can imagine a ionized beam that's all twisted magnetically, and all of the particles are twisted just like a high tensile rope, but it goes for maybe kilometers, maybe hundreds of kilometers, maybe even thousands, millions, or billions of kilometers, as a pulling force, essentially. And you can set up your system to go in any direction or maintain stability in one place. So in any case, this is part of what I had a taste of years ago, and that's what got me excited about the possibility of spreading the Tesla name and bringing flight to this to the crazy humans on this planet. And I'm still wondering if that's a good idea or not. But here we are. We're still pursuing the concept through the Keshe Foundation and through the plasma teachings, and this has been part of it from the beginning. It's a reminder that the Keshe Foundation is not necessarily a humanitarian organization. It is a space organization. That's what it's has always said on the website, and that's what Mr. Keshe has always pushed for, that it's a space organization. It's about going to space. And that can mean many things to many people in many ways. So we have physicality ways of going to space, and we have our soul-based ways of going to space, and so on. There's many different levels one could look at that as. So anyway, I've been yakking away for quite a while here, and I should give others an opportunity to say things and interchange here. Is there any questions or any comments on
Yes, Rick. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Okay. A question. You say consume energy for rotate this Tesla turbine. It's not possible self-sustain in a way, making pressure in this fluid in one tank and utilize this difference of pressure for self-sustain.
Yeah, it just needs a differential in pressure, exactly right. But it takes quite a bit. It's not just a small differential of 1 or 2 pounds per square inch. You'd need something around 70 or 80 pounds per square inch to start to make it work properly, and several hundred pounds per square inch to get high performance.
Okay, collect this current from these magnets. If you put these magnets, collecting this current, Tesla current, no, and utilize one little motor for pressurization, for making pressure for this air.
Well, the thing is, you can't get more energy out of it than what you put into it, and technically, but actually, in actuality, Tesla did mention that it's possible to get over 100% efficiency with his turbine under certain conditions. And I can see how that's possible when it starts to go plasmatic on its when it's burning certain fuels, and it becomes like a plasma in there. The whole formula kind of changes in terms of the interactions of the burning of particles and all that kind of thing. So there's.
I understand. It's just a question for making this perpetual mobile on Sopra unit device. And another question is similitude no, between a shoebox of Mr. Tesla with Magrav of Mr. Keshe, because it's putting a little bit energy and taking what is needed.
Oh, you're talking about the resonator box that Tesla had that he put
Yes.
on building and it shook the whole building?
All work of Tesla, it's now I see in plasmatic way.
Yeah,
And
well, that's a good example actually, because that's a case of what Dan's talking about. It was, yeah, like a shoebox sized device apparently, that it had an impact device inside that it was able to vibrate at a certain frequency. And Tesla had calculated out the vibration rate of this large building next door to his lab or whatever, somewhere nearby, and attached this box to it and set it up. And over a period of time, the building was starting to shake and it freaked everybody out. They called the cops and they came and had to shut down. I think they had to use a hammer and break the device to shut it off or something. It was quite dramatic, apparently.
or like a heat induction, no, and bipolar coils. It's like similar from concept with magravs.
Yeah, well, if you look at the magravs, I was going to mention that the magravs, like you brought that up, they sometimes or often they take time to build up these fields. If you look at the 129 Tesla, a test that Mr. Keshe did a few years ago, it took time to build up these fields. You could see that they would peak and they would peak and the peaks would get stronger and stronger. And then suddenly it was, you know, at 20 Tesla and then 40 and 80 and then eventually to 129 Tesla with these peaks. So that was interesting. That buildup, it does take a certain amount of time. Excuse me, something irritating my nose here. So go ahead, Dan. What else did you want to say about that?
No, it's interesting. Yesterday, Caroline teaching in chat in certain time, it's pop up one question of Zane, no, with somebody else say what's happened when you plug in one Magrav in the grid, and I recording for my Magrav or another Magrav guys. It's how it's not so important how it's built. No, it's important how it's built, but it's interesting how we make a connection, not physically, between gradient and consuming equilibrium between what you need and what you want and grow in the field. I don't know, 10 months ago, in one night, my light, it's from 10 seconds, not from 10 seconds, by 10 and 10 seconds, it's shining, it's glowing. And it's interesting because saying nobody came up with this what's happened when people making Magrav and putting in grid. It's interesting because only after 1 year, 2 years, it's making Caroline this repost.
That was a repost from Caroline, yeah.
Because you putting, I don't know, you consume 6 kilowatts and you're registering by contour of house, I don't know, like 0.3, 0.4 kilowatts. an hour. It's the way I connect these things from what Mr. Keshe say. When you have between, no, two twins McGraw, and what's happened when you putting closer physically, and when one is in the top, one is in the bottom, or you have another GANs bit closer, or you closer from this device. It's very interesting. When I put in one on top and one in the bottom, I sense sparks in like a like a shimmer, like a sparks, and I thinking, oh, I broken this, and I look inside. Yes, it's one spire of this Magravi. It's half. It's like when you're making spark up, no? You have this discharge, and I thinking, oh, I broken, and I wash it, and I making another connection in this Magravi, and I hopes seeing what happened with the new configuration. No bottom, middle, and the top for connection. It's from bottom in the top and return in the middle, like a skin.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know what you mean there, Dan, but did you want to explain that more on the whiteboard or something, or you're okay with that?
Okay, I share whiteboard. Okay, making with one color. When Mr. Keshe is saying like a layer, no? Like a skin. In old way, I putting, make me do it this in Magrav. Okay, first I enter in this manner with, oops, okay. In normal way, enter here, here, here. Now I make it in this way. I enter in from, I enter from this way in magnetic aid opposite, like a primer. After I take this and putting in this, and oops, another mistake. And up here. Bottom, I make it in the top, and I take from the middle, because I have this. I don't know, I understand run or better, but I try, and I wait a few days for seeing what happened. I already I already putting in water, plasma water, for repair nanocoat and guns, and I'm putting in the already in the grid without load, and from few weeks I see what happened. This is when I was thinking.
Okay, well, thank you, Dan, for explaining that. Remember Mr. Keshe saying something recently about reversing the connections. that we've been thinking of things kind of backwards with some of the connections. So.
Because it's not enough in unplugging, no? When you have a phase, a neutral, to have the coil of McGrath, have consumed, and putting in neutral. It's not because you change the gradient in the McGrath. You have, for example, CH3, and another things in, when you change, create another gradient, another interaction between these. It's important how in and how it's out.
Alrighty. I see the question has come up with Jay. I have a question about fields and radio waves. In a radio, why does the one radio does not absorb the wave itself? How are millions of car stereos able to pick up a split-second wave all at once, and there's too little cars to deplete the wave? Is it still there? Do the radio stations calculate the amount of cars and pump out more juice? What happens to the unused waves? And do car stereos have a sort of exhaust where they burp the off waves to get back to? You should look at the theory of radio transmission, and you would learn about that. And basically a wave gets put out by the radio station and will have a certain power, and the power will determine how far the wave's able to go, and anything that's able to pick it up in that area can pick up on it. If they don't pick up on it, it still has to put out the waves essentially in order to reach a certain distance and to get through the buildings and so on. I'm not sure what you mean about after a split second the wave isn't picked up. Does it still hang about for a while? Oh, well, basically they kind of zip out at the very high speeds unless it's a standing wave of some sort. Can waves be stored on plasma, though? Well, there's definitely waves in plasmas, and that's part of the knowledge that we'll need to learn as we go along, I guess. Depending what you mean by plasma and so on and so forth. Okay, anyone else have something they'd like to present at this point? I was looking at, I got some attendees to bring in. Let me help you come into this panelist here. Okay, let's see one more. So I was wondering if Zoltan, do you have anything you wanted to show us? You had a nice experiment that was similar to the Romanian one, I believe it was, with the magnetic ping pong ball with the deuterium GaNs or deuterium GaNs in it. Should find the Facebook link. That was nice. I think I have that saved. Let me see if I have it. To go at it differently. Just bear with me a minute. Just find the link in Facebook so that people can have a look at his experiment. There we go. Well, you find it on this page at least. If you got a direct link, Sultan, maybe you can put it in the chat there. That's the one group. If you scroll down, you'll see his experiment there. I can't put a direct link in for that one. Let me see, how else can we do it? There's the video. I can put a link in for that.
Zoltan confirm what Adrian making with his seal of the deuterium and interact with the magnet.
Yeah, I'll put the link in here. Put it in Facebook live stream. And people can have a look at that video. Well, maybe I could show that, show your video there, Zoltan, eh? Maybe you want to comment on it. He's posted it to a number of places here, as Facebook, the Spaceship Institute and Keshe Foundation Facebook sites. So let's have a look at that. Oops, it didn't work. Yeah, I guess it did. There we go. Okay, if there's anything you want to tell us about this, Sultan, maybe you can open your mic and say something.
Többé-kevésbé nyugalmi állapotba került.
So a couple of minutes, we can just play it through.
Fadarakkal.
I don't know if Zoltan is able to speak. It's about a piece of wood and a piece of aluminium and certain ball with it's making with deuterium.
Is this the wood we're looking at here, Dan?
I don't understand. Repeat.
Is this the wood that we're looking at? Is that the piece of wood or is that a piece of aluminum or something?
Making size bigger. Let me see. I show you. I think it's in left side or right side. It's wood. Another, I think it's aluminium because it's hanging from not interact with hands. I don't know if you perhaps Zoltan saying something.
Whoops. What happened here?
For this reason, also I put in magnet in my training coil when playing with field with my hands or another things. For this reason, for seeing interact between.
All right. Apparently the links that I put up are not probably a private link or something, and somehow not able to show apparently. So
Is make with plasma technology as for plasma technology. Mr. Zoltan sharing these things for confirmation of this experiment.
yeah, hopefully he'll make that into a Plasma Scientific Journal entry and compare with the other one. We can look at it as confirming or whatever some of the other data. Well, I prefer that he show the video or whatever he'd like to show there, because I'm not familiar with what's going on, don't know the language, so we'll have to let it go for now, I guess, until he wants to share. Maybe it'd be a good one for the Knowledge Seekers workshop, actually. You could think about sharing it there, Zoltan. That might be a good idea. If you can put together a little presentation, let us know beforehand. And anybody who would like to present something in the Knowledge Seekers workshop, which is kind of the idea of this group that I originally had, it would be a way to sort of leapfrog the ideas here into the Knowledge Seekers workshop. And some of the better ideas from here should be presented to Mr. Keshe in the Knowledge Seekers workshop, and allow him to look at it and evaluate what uses it may have, or to give us more information and so on. So to that end, if people are interested in presenting something, they should actually send their presentation into education@kfssi.org. And that way it'll be looked at by the education department, and they'll make a decision whether it's okay, and to make sure there's no copyright issues and that kind of thing, and present it. Then we present it all to Mr. Keshe and see if he wants to show it in the Knowledge Seekers Workshop. So if anybody has something, some pet project they'd like to present, some knowledge they'd like to put forward to increase our database of how things are in the universe. It could be agricultural experiment, a health experiment of some sort, or if you got a saucer that's lifting off your backyard, that would be fine as well. Keep hoping one day someone's going to pop the big one here and show the saucer lifting off. That would be nice. I think we're getting closer in many ways. Or perhaps we're here just to provoke someone else out there to do it. Maybe that's part of our reason for being, is to initiate the ideas in others and have it so it's okay, basically. You spend a lot of energy in this class here, this group, in the last what's been over 5 years now, and in just allowing these ideas to come out into the world. The idea of a reactor and plasma and all of the technical things we talk about were hard to talk about initially. It was, especially with some of the types of reactors, you know, they had the potential, they do have the potential for being revolutionary, groundbreaking apparatus in the higher gradient factors. And it gets into some pretty serious stuff sometimes. I have another attendee, Stefan, I'll bring you in.
Rick,
Anybody? Oh, hi, Moshfaq, go ahead.
Yes, so I would like to talk about, this is more of a theoretical stuff, of how the plasma rotation was achieved in the reactor I showed. And it will start from very basic at the electrical current going through the wire. I have to draw things, but it's very basic. I'll start from very basic because I sounded that device is complicated, and you know, one has to kind of understand plasma flow very in detail. I worked out some of it while I was building it, but as I got results, I can now say more concretely in terms of how plasma flow interacts.
Do you want to open your whiteboard, or shall I open one for you?
Let me log in from my computer, because then I can draw, because on the phone it's difficult.
Okay, very good.
If you want I put whiteboard and you are notate.
No, I can do it from my computer, but I'm on the phone, so I can't do it very well with the phone. So let me do that.
Okay, fair enough. You just need a minute or two there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Just checking any other questions or comments here.
So I'm opening the whiteboard now.
Okay.
Okay. Can you see it?
See it? Yep.
All right. So it is a good thing that you brought up that toroid shaped thing, that circle thing that you showed last time towards the end, Rick. Remember the thing that you're moving from one hand to another?
Let me show my video briefly, and I can demonstrate
Okay,
that.
let me
Remind
get
people
out.
about that.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Uh,
that toroid that you were moving from one hand to another, that actually is
Yeah.
very relevant in describing what I
just so that people can see. Now, I read something interesting about this today, which is that if you count the coils, I think we get, well, I was told that if you count them this way, you get 14, okay? But if you were to open this up as the toroid, it's actually 13 coils. It transforms from its closed down form to a different number of coils in its unleashed form of the toroid. So that's quite interesting, and it's got to do with the Fibonacci sequence and the number of coils and so on. It's actually quite interesting. There's a whole theory behind that, a knot theory they call it. But the idea is that you wanted to show is this toroid, the way it can flow so nicely. It's quite amazing, actually. It's almost like a little pet. You know, you can do so much with it. Once again, I'll just demonstrate it, for example, on a stick here. And if you start to get it going, oops, there's a here there. It's got its own momentum, and it has a natural thing for being able to cling onto. If I had a rope, it would be happy to travel along a rope. Or if I have a larger tube, it's happy to travel along a larger tube as well. It sure doesn't look like a toroid once it's actually, moving really fast. It looks more like a double bubble or something. It's hard to identify once it gets rotating really quickly. So that's briefly what you wanted to see, I guess, or what you're talking about, right?
Yes, actually, that will be very helpful in explaining some of the things. Thank you very much.
Just note one other little item before you go back to your whiteboard. I noticed that this thing, it's got a natural way when you put it on your hand, the inner part, when you put it around your thumb, it follows the hand all the way around, like this inner part inside here follows the thumb and hand right back around. It's tight around there, and it just almost fits like a glove, like it's supposed to be that way. You can do whatever you want with it. It doesn't change it at all. It just stays the same shape because it naturally just sticks in that position. So I thought that was pretty cool, as well as the fact that you can have it just rotate down and then instantly collapse to its ring formation, which to me is like the RNA compared to the DNA of the three-dimensional kind of realm. And we can flatten down that DNA and go back to our RNA form. And that's kind of how the soul operates, to my mind. But I'm sure you got another idea on that if you want to take it.
So one of the fascinating things that, as you are demonstrating here, is that as you move the toroid through your arms, it is adapting continuously, smoothly, with the size change that is happening as the motion happens. And this is very fascinating. You're muted, Rick.
Thank you. I wanted to show one more. Yeah, you're up. You're absolutely true about that. I wanted to show one more example that comes to mind that I just discovered recently while we're at it here, which is when this this ring turns into the toroid, and it naturally it has a center that it likes to be on, like a tube or rope or whatever that I've showed. However, just the free toroid, it also has this ability when it encounters an object to enclose that object in an inner little basket kind of shell thing. So you have an inner shell that's wrapped around the item, and you've got the outer shell here as well. There's two shells in this, and that becomes, you could toss it around, you can throw it back and forth. It's its own entity now. It's enveloped this sphere, and it's become one with the sphere, and I can separate it and get it to, you know, be different and so on. But once that's actually on the sphere, it's like a little basket. It'll hold the sphere in there. You can hold it up, and it becomes its own separate Coulomb barrier entity. And these are sort of like the fields, and that's the matter level in the center, you could say, or there's different ways to look at the allegory there. But I thought it's really cool that it's able to go from a toroid with its own kind of shape, but it's also kind of nebulous. It attains its shape by the interaction with its environment. Specifically, it likes something that it can ride on, like that shaft I showed, or a rope or whatever. But it's just neat the way this just crushes in. It's so simple. It just wants to do that. When it first happened, I went, what? It just grabbed the little sphere, and I was actually working with a heavier sphere than that, light one. This is a kind of a heavy plastic sphere, but it was the same sort of basic deal. You just push this on, and it encloses the sphere. Whoops, closes the sphere, and it's actually strong enough to hold it in there, at least until I do something weird with it. But basically, it's in there. It's got its own. If I can sort of make it more distinct. Well, there's actually two layers there. It's a little hard to see perhaps, but there's an inner and outer, and they're actually, you can see the inner goes one way, the outer goes the other way. There's intersection of these lines, these field lines, you could say. But there's an inner and outer, and they almost appear to be going opposite to each other when you actually get the thing rolling on a stick. I don't mean to hog all your time here, Mashrak, but if it's on a stick, then the inner, you see the inner part inside here along the stick itself, the inner goes, seems to go in one direction, and the outer goes in a different direction. So as this thing moves along, the outer part's going in one direction, the inner part's going in the opposite direction. So we have basically two counter-rotating fields, all built into the same dynamic here. There's a friction or an interaction between this outer and that inner. They're both sort of going in opposite directions as this thing travels. So it's got its own interaction with its own fields going on there. I think that's pretty significant. And if you think about this form, it's the same form as a smoke ring. That's how a smoke ring moves through the air, exactly the same way. And that's what makes it so efficient, is the momentum of that rotating vortex of air in a smoke ring allows it to move through the air. And it turns out that that's the most efficient means of moving through a fluid, is a vortex ring, not the classic teardrop shape that's supposed to be completely aerodynamic and that they said was the best way to move through a fluid and so on. No, this is way more efficient for moving through a fluid than the classic teardrop shape, at least at certain relative speeds and so on. Anyway, let's get back to what you have there, Moshfaq. Didn't mean to hog so much.
Hi, Rick. Hello, Rick.
Oh, hi, Jedi. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I just wrote down the YouTube page where you find the explanation.
Oh yes,
it's called the Torr-Flux paradox.
Yes, I just saw that video actually. If you could put the actual link into the video, that would be good as well. It just has the name of it there. Okay. If you copy the link and paste it in, that would be good. I meant to do that. That was it's a very interesting, it's got to do with the Fibonacci sequence and so on with this disappearing math that he's talking about. Okay, well, we should let Moshfaq go ahead with his explanation here, perhaps. You want to get your whiteboard up now, Moshfaq?
This is still interesting. What you just show is quite relevant because in engineering, you don't look at this kind of motion very much, but if you go in nature, you will see it often in the current. So this is actually quite relevant. And in understanding plasma flow, you're saying right now that it appears that there is one flow in one direction, the other in the opposite direction. Doesn't it remind you of gravitational magnetical? Because there are two
exactly.
At the same time.
Yes, and it's all a matter of perspective. When you say, well, is it magnetical or is it gravitational? Well, the answer is yes.
Yes, exactly.
All depends on, are you positioned over here watching this coil, this field line going in this direction, this tiny little being, and then all you can see is this one field line and you swear it's magnetical, it's going this way. And the other guy over here is saying, oh, you're wrong. I'm looking at this same thing. You say that's where it is, and I'm looking at it, and it's going the opposite of what you say. And somebody in the middle might be saying, well, it's doing both at the same time from my perspective. It's one's going one way, one's going the other way. What are you guys even talking about? So it's a matter of perspective. Where are you in that vortex? Or are you seeing the whole vortex, in which case you see the magnetic and gravitational? You're not so caught up in one or the other. Or is it this perspective? Is it rotating clock? Remember the clockwise, anti-clockwise argument? Well, it's clockwise. No, it's anti-clockwise. No, it's clockwise. No, it's anti-clockwise. Are you looking at the front of the clock or the back of the clock? Is it a human clock or an alien clock? That
was one of the funniest thing I've seen in this debate.
Yeah,
I mean, how can you debate about something? You just flip it and then the debate is over.
Yes, but yet it's a huge debate, both in industrial circles, because some screw manufacturers call it a clockwise thread, and others call it anti-clockwise because they're measuring it differently. So different fields of interest have different ways, and it got really confusing really quickly. And Mr. Keshe had his own convention that we had to adapt to as well. So there's a lot of coils made and had to be kind of reconfigured, let's say. But yeah.
Okay, let's see whether we can go through this explanation a little bit. So I will start as simple as I can. All right. So let's start with electricity, which is a magnetic flow, really. So we have a piece of wire. So we have a piece of wire, and the current is flowing through that wire. Let's say, okay. Okay, hang on a second. So if current flows through the wire and we know that there is magnetic field around the wire using our right-hand rule in engineering, they use it all the time. So you have a magnetic field that's rotating right. Like if the arrow is pointing to the thumb of your you are using your thumb to point the arrow direction, then the magnetic field is the rest of your finger, or the rest of your fingers. So that's basically how we think about the magnetic field that's generated around an electrical wire. And it's very simple, and most people can look it up and all that. And there's a little more to it, but for simplicity, I'll just, so it's kind of like, I'll use a different color. So your fingers are wrapping around it like this. And that's your magnetic field. Now let's, so this is a single wire that we have where we have electrical flow, and then we have the magnetic field. And now let's look at, having difficulty picking color. Okay, why is this thing moving? Not letting me pick color. Okay. Okay, I got it. All right, I picked a different color, but now if we look at a planet or an atom or one of those things, and we have the circle, and we have, again, a field flow going through it from gravitational to magnetical. Hang on a second. Why am I having, anyway, I won't change color, but, and like the case of there, we have the field line. Why is not my pen not working? For some reason, it stopped working.
You maybe have to select the draw item you want. The colors are in the formats section there.
Yeah, but my pen stopped working.
Okay, then you have to go to the draw and select the upper left icon there.
Hang on a second. Hang on a second. It's just something my laptop did. Hang on a second. There's some technical difficulties here.
That's the big problem of being human. It's all fun and games till you get down to the technical difficulties.
Yes, I don't know why. This never happens. Let me stop sharing and start again.
Yeah, you may have to do that. Yep.
Okay, it's not, nothing is clicking either. I don't know why. Let's go.
Do you want me to
okay.
let me do something to share, and then you can share again, like, or maybe I'll put up a whiteboard. Why don't you draw on it?
Okay. All right. Let me see whether I can draw on it. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I'll try to draw on it. So we have this planet. No, I can't draw on it for some reason. I don't know what. Let me try my phone.
Oh, maybe I might have to allow you to annotate or something. Let's see here. Where is it?
Oh, I don't see the annotate. Okay, I see it on my phone, but I don't see it here. Well, my laptop is misbehaving. I think that's the main reason for it, because it's not clicking properly.
I had issues with.
Let me turn it on.
Click.
I don't know what's going on here.
Is it a Mac or a PC?
It's a Linux.
Oh, okay.
Usually this problem does not exist here, but
yeah. Well, I had trouble with my Mac clicking on the Zoom window properly earlier as well.
Okay, I'll restart the computer.
Okay.
It shouldn't take too long, but so I can talk while it gets restarted. So you have the spherical, let's talk about planet Earth. And the flow is from the bottom to the top, and we see this magnetic flux line around the planet. We see those pictures everywhere, right? And so it's very similar to what we call the current going through the wire. Not much different at all, because you are getting the same flux line, magnetic flux line, that's what they call it. And it's the same story in case of magnets, and that's why we have electromagnets as well. So when we did have these lines, and if you look at this, it's very much like what Rick showed, the toroid that he was moving from, moving on his hand. So let me see whether I can draw now on your screen. I think I can draw now. No, I can't, but I can probably. Let me try sharing. If you stop sharing, let me try sharing again.
Okay.
I just restarted. Okay, you can see it. Okay. So now what I'm saying is that I'm having the same problem again. I don't know why. Okay, let me try to draw it with my finger on the phone.
The pen looks like it's up there now. The pencil is on the screen. You see it as an icon.
Yeah, I see, but it's not working. I don't know. Is this the first time I'm having this problem? Anyway, we'll see. We'll sort that out. But anyway, let me try to draw it with my finger on the phone. That's not happening. Okay, anode. So you have this, and then there is this flow from the bottom to the top. And then you have the, let me pick another color. Phone is not cooperating as well. Okay, how does it happen? Okay, so you have this flux line that goes around it, and this is the toroid that Rick was showing a moment back. So, so you have these kind of, instead of electrical current, here we have plasma flowing. Now, if we transfer this idea of flux forming around, magnetic field flux forming around where the field is flowing, we can go to the next step. Okay, now clear it. So let me draw a few lines here, and let me change color. So, okay. So I will draw 8 lines here. These are, you can think of them as the coils of your maggraph coils. One of those maggraph coils, they are they're connected. But I'll draw it this way because then it's easier for me to explain. So imagine there is a flux around each of these wires as plasmatic current is flowing through them. So I'm just doing a 1D version of the circular coil, but the motion is circular. Imagine it's in circular in the direction that we cannot see. So there will be a flux sort of like this around this. And it's a toroid because it's a ring. And same is true for each of these lines. Now, so the first two coils will interact with each other. So let me say that the interaction is this. The same way these two will interact. This two will interact. This two will interact. My precision is lacking because I'm using a finger on the phone. So you have interaction with the adjacent coils. Now these fields that I just drew, which also interact with each other. So you have interaction like this. And then you have another higher level interaction between these fields. So you can it builds up at the center. So this interaction is building up, the potential is building up. Now let's look at something else. So this is our maggraph coil, but now our maggraph coil is laid out in this manner. So we have this maggraph coil. So as we see, this interaction is increasing towards the center. So it will be maximum at this point. And the starting point is minimum, or the ending point is minimum. So there is a potential difference between the two. Now, if we take a ball, in order to spin a ball, what do? We put forces here, which is if we hold this other end and put force here, it starts spinning. Look at this situation. If we put an invisible plasma ball here, it will start to spin because of the potential difference between the 2 points. This took some time for me to understand because this is a basic understanding of the maglev coil. Now, so this is how the field within that plasma reactor is rotating. There is no physical motion, but I'm just talking about just one coil here. We'll slowly get into the other part, but let's clear up this. So the ball is rotating because of a potential difference that's being created in the coil. This understanding of the coil, I haven't seen it mentioned anywhere, but it came to me as I was doing these experiments. But there is a potential difference, and this is what's being used to create the rotation in the ball. And there are, of course, manifestations in the actual experiments, but this is a very basic understanding. And then we can go into the gravitational and magnetical coil, but this is a very simple way of understanding the creation of non-mechanical plasmatic motion. And I think there are several other understandings that goes with the experiment that I have done, but we can now use this idea, whether we are using GANs, gradient of GANs, or any other means. The coils are not necessary from now that I understand a little better. Coils are not really necessary at all. I mean, to create any of these motion, as long as our objective is to spin the ball inside. The plasma can be put into motion in various ways, but this basic understanding of the potentials, much like the way you spin a ball with your hand, it's not any different. But having this understanding, one can do any rotation of any field strength. Now, if you change the potential at this point, you will be accessing if you change the potential at this point, then you will be accessing different field strength. And so, and the speed will also, you can change the speed in this way as well. So there is the concept of potential and the power. So think of in both of those terms, you can see how you can access different plasmatic potential and different speed of rotation. So I'll stop at this because kind of like let this idea sink in, then we'll go into more detail. But I have not seen anybody talk in such simple terms. I personally, I like to understand things clearly. And this is what my experiment is really to develop an understanding of various aspects that Mr. Keshe talks about in various talks, but it has to be tangible in my own way, not, Mr. Keshe talks in his own language and his own understanding, and I have to have similar understanding to get to any flight or any movement for that matter. So right now, my objective is very simple, to create just movement using, just like, Rick shows his magnet. Now,
I wanted to show you another little thing.
The magnet movement is very important because if we can create devices which creates attraction and repulsion, then the rest of it, flight and other things, will be easy. I mean, rest of it is, I think, it's once we get to that point. So I'm trying to get to that point more than anything else, using very basic understanding of plasma flow and attraction and repulsion. But anyway, so Let me stop here for now.
Yeah, I want to use a whiteboard.
Okay, yeah.
So you can leave that up for now. Oh, okay, you can take it down as well. So I wanted to bring up this idea because you mentioned simple ways that the universe works. And to me, this exemplifies the simplicity of what you're just talking about, but in a slightly different way. And if we were to replace this sort of heart-shaped piece here with a disc, basically a copper disc, it will do the same thing in rotating. All it needs to do is have a current, which is delivered by the battery, a magnetic field, which is delivered by these magnets here attached to the battery, and the conductor, which can be...
Are you drawing something? I don't see anything.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't... No, I'm on the video right now, actually. You're probably not seeing it because you're...
Stop sharing.
Oh, yes. You will have to stop sharing that.
Okay, all right.
Actually, that brings it up in my live stream as well. So I didn't realize that wasn't being shared. So let me just review again here. If you look at this little device, it's based on the idea of what's called a homopolar motor. And it's the simplest way to attain motion. And it's actually the basis, I believe, of the motion in the universe. And what we have here is a current delivered by a battery and a magnet. So it's a magnetic field and a current. And when that current is, there's actually no current right now because the current is only delivered when the minus and positive is connected in the battery. Right now we have the potential, but there's no actual rotation from the current at this point. But once you add this part to it, it connects the upper terminal and the bottom the upper terminal and the bottom terminal here. And it produces a torque, a rotation, as you can see when it's down on the desk here. So, and it's exactly that right-hand rule that you were talking about before, Moshfaq, where the current could be where the thumb goes. And in this case, say, going this way, you can take any convention for current, negative, the positive to negative, depending on what you're talking about. But let's say the current goes this way, then the fingers indicate the field. So there's a field when there's a current through this battery, which is when this connector is put on, it actually develops a current, and the current flows through this wire. And like you're saying, the wire develops a magnetic field when there's a current flowing through it. So the current flows through the wire and interacts with the existing magnetic field that's on the magnet and actually in the battery too, because the battery is magnetic as well. And those two interactions between those two fields produces the torque. And it's so simple. All you need is the current, a magnetic field, and a conductor. And that can work whether it's on the physicality level here or out in space when we're talking about conductive ionized gases in huge clouds, magnetic fields that are extending over light years of distance, and the forces of electrical current that are available in some of the structures in space. So to produce rotation, all we need is those three main factors: the conductor, the current, and the magnetic field. And that's what I wanted to exemplify here. And if I go back to the whiteboard for a moment, let's just have a look at that. And you see, so if we have say a disk, and we were to look at that disk, we'll have say a side view of the disk down below here. Give a little bit of depth in this case. Well, it's not much of a disk, but you can use your imagination there. So we have this disk that looks like this will be the top view at the top one here, and this will be the side view on the bottom unit. And if we were to have this to be a conducting disk, let's say copper, for example, and we were to have a bearing or some sort of pivot in the center so it can rotate. Let's say it's got a little bearing that's, maybe it's mounted on something on a table or whatever. Now, if we were to run electricity into the center of that disk, so you have a battery, say, over here, and let me do a different color because it's going to get complicated otherwise. Let's say we have a battery here, and part of the battery goes to the center, and the other part of the battery touches this outer part of the disk. Well, normally, since this is a conductor and it's copper, it will essentially short out the disk, short out the circuit through the disk, and it would probably burn out the battery quite quickly. But what happens that's interesting, if you were to put this disk in a magnetic field, just has to be in a magnetic field. Let's say the magnetic field is going this way through the disk, and it's got say a north here and a south here or orientation. Well, the presence of that magnetic field with the conductor disk and the power going into the disk, in that case, will cause a rotation of the disk. And this is a strange phenomenon because we don't think of a piece of copper disk just rotating so simply by just hooking a battery up to it. Doesn't make sense. I ran into this phenomenon 10 or 11 years ago, and I was amazed that I never heard of this in my schooling and all of the engineering classes and all of the physics and everything else. A simple homopolar motor, it's called. And all it takes is a conductor in a magnetic field with a gradient of current across it will start rotating. That's what it does. So in a way, if you have any kind of current or potential out in space, and you have a conductor such as possibly clouds of ionized hydrogen, which are predominant in many places, and other factors, then the same phenomenon to me is causing the rotation of the planets, the rotation of the solar system and galaxies. The whole works basically is it's called the technical science name is the Lorentz force. I think it's Lorentz, Lorentz force. And that's that right-hand rule with the fingers and the thumb and so on. And in this case, the thumb would be, say, pointing upwards, and then the fingers will curl around to show the magnetic field. And if you show that the interaction with the existing magnetic field and the field that's created by putting power to this simple disk, then it's a matter of two fields interacting. And that's what causes the rotation, which is always the cause of rotation ultimately, is two fields interacting. That's what electric motors are. What's what...
Rick, I want to add something here a little bit. I know the electrical engineering story of this, but this Lorentz force that you're talking about, if we take the gravitational and the magnetical together, actually it's much easier to explain. And I will do it some other time, but let's not overload everybody. But it's actually quite easy to come up with this Lorentz force if you look at it that way. But our text is only based on the magnetical side, so we don't have this other part. And so anyway, just to add something to what, when I showed the right-hand rule, I didn't show the other finger, the Lorentz force. But anyway, just to add to what you just said.
Rick is not like an empty box of Mr. Keshe, because in center you have one field, one field with each gradient. In the lateral side, you have another field, another potential. The interaction between these two fields is like an empty box and this Faraday disk, homopolar disk, in physical way and in plasma way.
Well, yeah, you could look at it that way. If as long as that empty box has the connection between the inner and outer, that it's able to conduct in some way, whether it's maybe just the fields are interacting or it's conducting through the atmosphere inside the box, because there's actually no such thing as an empty box when you think about it. If it's empty, it's something.
Full.
It's full of either air or molecules of some sort. Even if it's vacuumed out totally, that makes it even less than an empty box, or even more than a full box, because it's full of fields then. In fact, the fields can then interact way more easily in an empty box than they can in a full box. That's the whole idea of vacuuming, the vacuum chambers, where everything comes to life. Plasma balls and other things like that wouldn't work if it wasn't for the vacuum, or at least partial vacuum of the chamber to make it all work. So,
With your, sorry.
No, go ahead.
With your wires, you connect these 2 points or 2 fields. It's not the plasma exists without seeing in this piece of copper or this piece of space. It's already there. You are connected in one way.
So how do you see the connection? What is the connection, let's say? How does that?
In physical way, you make a center and this ring, no outer ring. And in plasma way, it's in, how to say, you create a flux with no in present of this wire, like a root, like a arter, like a road, no? Also in the air, it's passing. But you are create this connection between this point, physically and plasmatic, in plasmatic way.
Okay. Well, if we look at
Rick, you can
Go ahead.
think in terms of gradient as well. I mean, think of a gradient. If we put a resistor in there, we can create a gradient much easier. I mean, you know, the copper disc has a little bit of resistance, but that creates a little bit of gradient. But think of potential gradient in terms of plasma between two plasmatic point. And then you can create the flow at, it doesn't have to be physical at all.
So yeah, the thing about gradient comes up quite a bit. Now, gradient usually means like we have to discern a little bit between the gradient. Like if we were to look at this little diagram here, we might have a gradient. Let's say it was a 10 volts as a gradient. And so maybe we have 0 here and we have 10 here in terms of this battery, that 10 volt battery we have. So we have this gradient, this potential, it's called, between those 2 points. But when the points are connected with a conductor, whether it's a solid wire or a disc in this case, then that becomes part of the circuit, and there's no longer that, the gradient becomes less because the voltage gets drawn down due to the current that's going on and all that kind of thing. There's a once the current starts to flow, it's a different ball game in a way. So there'll still be, if there was resistance, like you're saying, a lot of resistance here in between this circuit, then you still maintain a high gradient, and your resistance might have the gradient, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 10 volts or something along this resistor or coil, if we were to turn it into the coil that we were talking about. So the in and out will have a different gradient in the coil, and that helps create the fields in there.
Now, Rick, in our case, it's a little bit different. We have to think in terms of superconducting circuit. Now, so here, instead of thinking of battery being drawn down and the voltage going to 0, let's think about we are maintaining the potential. And there is a current flow because of that potential. We can change the current by maintaining a different potential, but the current flow is there, but it's superconducting. So this is, we have to kind of move away from a little bit from this idea of.
Well,
finite source. Okay, anyway, go ahead.
The idea of what? Sorry, I cut you off there. I needed the last word. The idea of the finite
potential source and the drag on that source, which is our resistance.
Right. Well, the thing about it is, I wanted to mention at this point is that if you look it up a couple of years ago, the U.S. Navy came up with new Navy ships, and they're really high tech and super stealth, and you know all this. They're having trouble with them because they're so high tech, of course. But the motors in those new units are homopolar motors based on the same theory, and they use superconducting circuitry in them, cooled down to liquid nitrogen temperatures in order to, or I think the liquid helium actually, to cool down the circuitry to a superconducting realm. And they use a homopolar motor for the motor. It turns out to be the most efficient electric motor that's ever been invented. It's something like 98% efficient. It's outrageously efficient. It just works really well. It's super quiet, and it's what you need for stealthy, Navy type maneuvers and so on. And this is the latest. I think they were 50,000 horsepower motors, and there are two of them in each unit, in each destroyer type boat, or not destroyer, whatever they were, as naval ships, stealthy naval ships. So this is actually the latest technology, in spite of being one of the first concepts of where electricity. This gets back to Faraday and the Lorentz, the guys that were initially started the electrical revolution, you might say. But it's a very basic idea, and it's so simple at its core compared to all other electric motors where you have a commutator or you have some sort of other interaction with fields and so on. This is as basic as it gets, you know, with the three force, the three things involved. So it's interesting in that sense. We can extrapolate from the physicality stuff, the copper disk and all that, to look at the disks of our galaxies and of other disk formations in the universe. It's actually fairly common. And if we start to look at vortexes and other tornadoes and what do you call it, hurricanes and whatnot, it's the same basic concept. You're dealing with the similar forces involved that create such structures.
Vortices are inverse of your donut or toroid.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept.
So it's actually very easy. It's the inner part of your toroid that's the vortex.
Mm-hmm.
One going outward, one going in, and you know it's the same thing that we think in terms when we do the gravitational and magnetical. It's very similar idea actually, and they all fit together quite nicely.
Mm-hmm. Depends again on your perspective. Are you looking for vortex,
yeah, I mean,
or are you looking for toroids? You have toroid vision, or vortex vision today?
Yeah. Oh, by the way, is one of those ship called HMS Donald Cook? By the way, I just want, the thought came to me.
I'm not sure, actually. I'm not sure if it was
because you know that was disabled by Keshe.
Yeah, I think that's a different one. If
that's one of the most advanced destroyers, as far as I know.
Possibly. They have a new one that they just launched. I think it was this year, actually.
Okay,
The
then it's
Donald
new.
Pick thing was a couple of years ago, right? 3 years ago or something.
Yeah.
Well, I'll see if I can find the link here.
All right, let's get back to our
Yeah, back to our main topic here. It would be probably more appropriate.
So if you think about the homopolar motor that you were showing, and if you think in terms of, there are two levels of toroids. One is the current flow through the wire, and the whole motor is rotating again. So think of, it's very similar to what you showed actually, your toroid going across your hand. Because the homopolar motor has a similar configuration. You have you can think of this rings as conducting current, creating its own magnetic field, and that whole assembly is rotating. So you can think of those circle rotating as like your toroid that you showed, the mechanical one on your hand. Same thing.
Yep, definitely. That makes sense. The the field structure of the bottom of the magnetic field in the conductor of the disc actually would have that toroid kind of shape around it. Like,
can I come in here for a minute? I know you guys are into electronics. I know most fact you're an electrical engineer. So this is hard to accept. There is no electrons flowing through a wire. There's no induction going on at all. This is something that was known by Oliver Heaviside. He published in his book, Electricity and Matter, in the 1890s, got him killed. This concept of electrons flowing through the wire is a theoretical concept. I actually studied the, what's it called? The compendium published by the Vril Society, the development of the study of the theory of electrons. It's a good idea, but wrong. There's no induction. This is not correct. It's not, there's no electrons. But look at this disk on your top picture, Rick. You have that battery. You're assuming that there's electric currents, electrons flowing through the wire. There isn't. There's a magnetic field flowing around that wire. And when it goes to
electrons, I didn't say electrons. I said a current.
Oh, I know.
But currents defined as electrons. Actually, it's a electromotive force, which is different.
Well, it's the magnetic field that's spiraling around the wire. That's the only energy that's going on there. There's nothing going on inside the wire. It's that magnetic field. The so-called induced magnetic field with the right-hand rule is the energy. Nothing else, only that. But there's a two-way energy. Mr. Keshe showed this last week, I think, that Tesla didn't know, that you always have two ways. It's not just the right-hand rule. You actually have a field going the opposite direction. But that's not that's what's causing the battery to short out, is because you're getting a feedback loop and it's increasing amplitude, and it's going to blow out your battery. Whereas when you put it in another magnetic field, that magnetic field does exactly what Oliver Heaviside did when he wrapped the telephone wire with magnetic metal, tape with magnetic metal. It insulates the field and it draws the energy. It creates a balance. Where you have the feedback loop, it's getting absorbed into the magnetic field, so you don't blow up your battery. See, that's all that's happening. And now the fields, the copper wire can rotate because it can overcome the inertia. That's all that's happening, is it's just enough energy to overcome the inertia. But it's all plasma fields, all of it, everything. And you know how, like, that vortex, when you put the ball inside the vortex, it naturally created a container around it. Well, imagine that ball you put in there is another vortex. And there's another vortex inside that, and another vortex inside that. And And that's what's really going on. And there's something else that Mr. Keshe explained that is something on the drawings that I drew over and over again that I could never understand, that there should be a field in the Earth. There should be a field. We think of it as having the in at the South Pole and the out at the North Pole. But according to the drawings that I did for years, I was looking at that and I didn't understand it. There's a field, should be one field going in the top, another field going in the bottom, and they're poking a hole in the center of the Earth. And that backlash, that spray is coming up and creating the fields of the Earth. They come back out and continue both. So there's actually a field going in the North Pole and a field going in the South Pole. That field that goes in the North Pole is actually coming out the South Pole, and the field that's going in the South Pole is going out the North Pole. But after going in and out of a central core, right, the soul of the Earth there. And so there's actually two ways every time. See, so we're still looking monodirectional. You know, we're still thinking magnetical instead of magnetical and gravitational. And again, it's just different directions, but that's really what's going on, right? So again,
yeah, well, it's right. There's always Mr. Keshe sometimes is called eddy currents as the sort of backlash or the secondary fields that are happening that are counter to the ones that you try to set up initially, or it gets, one field brings on another, it seems.
Yeah, Mr. Keshe described it in a few different ways. Drilling a hole into a piece of wood. The sawdust that comes spraying out is the difference of the mass of the wood and the hole, right? It's exactly that much mass. And he described it as a shower head pouring into a drain, where most of the water goes into the drain, but some of it splashes out and pools around the center, around the drain. And the amount of water that's splashing out is the exact difference of the water that's coming out of the shower head as opposed to what's going into the drain. So you have this differential of the fields interacting, and that's the feedback loop, right? It's the differential. And so I just wanted to put that in there, that the idea of electrons and things flowing through the wires and all that, we've got to get away from that. And there's
I totally agree. I've never trusted electrons, especially when I asked in university specifically to this, supposedly one of the top professors in the country of USA or whatever. And we were talking about electrons, and he's describing the theory behind the electron and the charge, Q1, Q2, and all this stuff. And I asked, well, all this theory and the figures are fine, but what is an electron? Can you tell us what an electron is? And he could not explain it. All he could explain it was in terms of a couple of boards of writing, and I was not at all satisfied with that response. And I haven't truly believed in electrons since. But there is something called an electromotive force that seems apparent, and that's related to, like you say, the plasma fields, the field effects, not the actual.
Yeah, there's no need for electrons to flow through a wire. There's no need for induction. You think about it, Faraday's in the 1840s, and by the 1860s, actually the first two so-called electromagnetical devices, the first two inventions using the Faraday's discovery, is the telegraph is the first, and the telephone is the second. Then the light bulb. First, it's the telegraph. And what's a telegraph? A magnet, a piece of metal, and a wire on both ends. You move the magnet over here, it moves the magnet on the other end. Right? Yeah, and the telephone is actually the most amazing thing, because it's the same. It's the, you know, that's why it's the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, or Telegraph and Telephone Company, because all he did was replace the chunk of metal with a wafer thin metal disc. So that there, it shows another level of how about magnetic fields, that they store information, right? It's what our RNA is. Everywhere in the universe are these magnetic fields that store information. Is in the form of, I guess, vibrational patterns, not just rhythm, timbre, and pitch, which is what the telephone does, but frequencies of light, which is also being transferred and stored in the fields. I mean, we store information on the magnetic hard drives, not electronic hard drives. It's the magnetic fields that are storing everything. Same thing with us. Same thing with our RNA. Same thing with the universe. Every single smell, taste, feel, emotion, these are all energy, vibrational patterns that have energy signatures that are stored in the fields.
Yep. Every single atom, if we were to look at atoms that way, will have its own signature that way, its own magnetic signature. And it's hard to believe. We're taught to believe that atoms are all the same. This is the most basic building block of the universe. They're the same everywhere. If you have a hydrogen atom, is a hydrogen atom. Proton's a proton, right? But what if every single proton, one right beside the other one, is a different proton, just because of its positioning and its history is going to be different, and that gets recorded in that magnetic fields of that tiny little entity. It's hard to believe. It's hard to conceive of, and yet there's people like, what's his name, Nazarene Harajin, that I always have trouble pronouncing his last name.
Yeah, I have some.
He claims there's an entire universe of these fields inside of a proton, for example, or neutron, that is the same as the whole universe we're looking at now, with all of its trillions and billions of stars and galaxies, and all of that is like that inside of every proton. And each one is different in its own way, but you can access the universe through the proton in a way too, because it's a reflection of the totality at the same time, because it's got its soul.
I think that's what Mr. Keshe calls the neutron. And I have some serious problems with all of those sacred geometry websites. They're pulling a little mathematical sleight of hand, and there's a lot of deception going on in there. And
perhaps, but this has to do more with the calculations of, I think it's got to do with the Planck length and all of this.
Well, what they're doing is they're taking the harmonic overtone series, which is fractions, and turning them into whole numbers, which is the temper tuned, and they're getting this 432 and this 256, and there's sleight of hand going on there it's got the ooh factor, and they're all doing it. And most of them, I don't think you're even aware of it, but it's hard to see how they could not be aware of it when they're actually doing it. There's a bit of mathematical sleight of hand going on there. The truth is, it's that vortex, Rick. You have a layer inside 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 a layer. It's crystal spheres, one inside the other that the ancients thought. If the ancients had it right, we're the ones that got it wrong. And so how far down do you go? I mean, what's inside the soul of the man? If the fields are centering around a central core, if you zoom into the central core, it's fractal geometry. What are you going to get? You're going to get another vortex. What's at the center of that? Right? Until you get to the source, right? And in both directions, right? It's fractal. So it's all going to be the same. But there's a thing about the energy signature. Remember a few weeks ago, I was talking about how if you have a hydrogen, and that say has 128 layers, and you have an oxygen, and that has 128 layers. But the difference of those numbers, if the oxygen has a vibration rate, a pulse rate at its outer layer 8 times faster than the hydrogen, then when you have a layer by layer connection of multiple core reactors linking, then the first layer, when you have a water molecule or the hydrogen and the oxygen come together, the first layer will be the hydrogen. But the second layer of the hydrogen is not going to, there's no interaction there. So you'll have nothing at the second layer, third layer, fourth layer, fifth layer, sixth layer, seventh layer. Then at the eighth layer, you have an interaction with the oxygen's first layer. The second layer of the oxygen is 16 times faster. So you have these gaps in between the positioning of the, it's a multiple core reactor, but there's now not just 128 layers. There's only so many where there's the interaction between the two. So that's its energy signature, where the gaps are. That's what you would see in a Fourier spectral analysis, the gaps in between. You have the spaces where those layers would be, but they're not there because you don't have an interaction. So if you look at that, you think about the field of nitrogen exists because there's an interaction of the field of the sun and the earth at a particular position. So now that means the nitrogen has its own energy signature. So it's not just 128 layers, it's got gaps too. It's what we call timbre in music. It's what makes one note, the same pitch, sound different on a piano than a guitar or a flute or a violin or a voice or whatever. It's its own energy signature because of the gaps in between. So when the nitrogen expands and interacts with the field at the Earth's position where you have the oxygen, then the oxygen itself has got the difference between the fields of the nitrogen and the oxygen, which has got its own timbre, its own positioning of the layers. And then the carbon on the other side has its position. And then the difference of those is the hydrogen at the bottom, which has the full spectrum. But within the amino acid structure, it's just those layers. So you have one layer at hydrogen, one layer, but you have the potential of all those, what we call the elements. At 128 layers, that's more than enough for every known element, right? But here's another thing that really, Armin came in and repeated more or less what I said, that the hydrogen and the oxygen, the carbon and the nitrogen in the upper atmosphere is what we call an amino acid. So that's got its own energy signature. It's a multiple core reactor with gaps in between the layers. But when that amino acid comes in contact with the salt water, it slows it down. But you still have the same differential. The carbon is 6-to-1 ratio of hydrogen. The nitrogen is 7-to-1, and the oxygen is 8-to-1. And you also have the 6-to-7 and 6-to-8, and the 7-to-6 and 7-to-8, and the 8-to-6, 8-to-7, right? You have all those differentials. So as long as those differentials remain the same, you have an amino acid. And I said, so what's the difference between the amino acid in the higher atmosphere and the one in the lower atmosphere where it's slowed down with the salt, where we are? And Armin said it's a different field strength. Wow, think about the implication of that. If it's a different field strength, so in the upper atmosphere, you have hydrogen, that's a field strength. That's not the same as the hydrogen we are interacting with. Our hydrogen is our hydrogen, not a hydrogen. There's not a hydrogen. There's the difference between the carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen at that particular field strength relative to us. See, there's not a harmonic overtone series. There's not an atom of hydrogen. There's only the differential, only the difference between those three that create that fourth one, right? And it's an interesting concept. We're talking about our perceptions again. You know, what we call hydrogen is just hydrogen to us, not by any. Yeah,
that's true. Many of the things within our atmosphere and gravitational system of Earth that we consider normal is not normal outside the atmosphere of Earth, and the entire universe works differently than
even the different layers of the atmosphere. Even there's a hydrogen up there, there's a hydrogen over here. If the salt is tuned to a different one, you have a different hydrogen.
There's different cosmic rays and energy levels in space that change the whole dynamic and end up ionizing things that wouldn't normally be. The vacuum of space changes everything. It makes electric. When you work with the vacuum chamber, you notice the more you vacuum out, the easier it is for electricity or for plasma flow to flow so easily in the vacuum of space compared to Earth. Earth is like a downer for plasma. It takes a lightning bolt of plasma to get through on this planet. It's so dense.
Yeah, and so again, it's, you know, if the amino acids, like when I correlated the atomic numbers to the harmonics and assigned letter names, I was doing the math and assigning the letter names. And what I got was carbon is an E, if hydrogen is an A, then carbon would be an E, nitrogen would be a G, and oxygen would be an A in a higher octave. Okay, so you have those three notes. Strange thing is if I play those three notes on my guitar, my low A string will want to vibrate. It'll start vibrating by itself without me strumming it. Okay, and this is exactly what Mr. Keshe said about the amino acids back with the Ancient Orange thing when somebody was asking him about that. He said, okay, take your amino acid, get rid of the hydrogen. Oh, you can't get rid of the hydrogen, it'll just come back again. It's exactly the same thing as if I can mute that A string with my finger, but as soon as I take my finger off, as long as those other three strings are ringing, that A will ring out. See, so what is causing that? The difference of those beats of those three frequencies based on their ratios. It doesn't matter where I tune my guitar down. I can tune my guitar down to 400. As long as those strings are in tune with each other, the A string will ring out. See, no difference with the upper atmosphere and interacting with the salt. But, you know, if you slow that down into a much, much slower vibration rates, pulse rates, they're actually pulsing, not vibrating, they're heart beating, right? Mm-hmm. If you slow that down more to where if I have 3 metronomes and I put one at six beats per second, that's something a metronome can do. Another one at 7 beats a second, another one at 8 beats a second. That's the same ratios as nitrogen, carbon, and oxygen, right? And if I leave those 3 metronomes clicking they'll randomly click and then they will synchronize with each other. It'll take a little bit of time. They will synchronize with each other. And what will happen is once a second, the 3 will click exactly at the same time. And then they will randomly they're not random, they will do their off clicking, some kind of a rhythmic pattern. And once a second, they will all 3 click at the same time. So now what we're talking about is the hydrogen at 1 to 6 to 7 to 8 is actually not a thing. It's 3 times the amplitude. It's where 3 metronomes are clicking at the same time in synchronized. And it's 3 amps louder. It's 3 times louder, which is interesting because it's also in the 3rd octave lower. Okay, so volume is the size of its bubble, and that's the lower one. See, again, so what is hydrogen? Hydrogen is the difference of the beats where they're synchronized. Okay, it's an energy pulse. What's nitrogen? It's the difference of the field of the earth and the sun. What's the oxygen? The difference of those fields. It's where they're synchronized. Very different way of looking at the universe, right? So if I slow that down to something at that slower level, we can see an interaction. What is hydrogen? It's 3 times the amplitude, right? And if you look at a Fourier spectral analysis of that, you will see clicking at 6 beats, 7 beats, 8 beats, and 3 amps at, if they're each 1 amp, 3 amps clicking at one time a second. So you will actually see 4 things. You're not seeing a metronome magically appear, a 4th metronome, right? So hydrogen, is it a thing? Or is it a manifestation of energy fields?
Well, you might be interested in the last music and art for the Keshe Foundation class that occurred as well. Where
yeah, you know, I wanted to apologize. You know, let me interrupt you for a second. That's Friday night at 7 p.m. for me, my time, and I have to work.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. So sorry about that. I mean, I really saw that and I was like, oh man, tried to take off of work, but it didn't work out.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Go ahead, please explain.
Well, what we played with was you mentioned slowing down and so on. So what it reminded me of is, what we did is we had been working with bird song and bird sounds. So people had recorded some bird sounds. And somehow I got the idea that to slow down these bird sounds and see what they sounded like. So I slowed them down around 20 to 1. And it turns out they sound exactly like whale sounds. If you record certain birds, at least the ones that we played with, and slow them down, it's virtually identical. I couldn't tell the difference as I'm an amateur as far as listening to whales, of course, but I couldn't tell the difference between whale sounds and the birds when the birds was simply slowed down. Like you're talking about the timbre and the volume and the amplitude and so on. Well, essentially, when the bird sound is slowed down so that the pitch is lower, or what we call the frequency, you could say the frequency, and extended out over time, not just the pitch lowered, but the actual time extended, then it turns out to be very similar, if not the same, as the whale. And I'm thinking, is there some kind of common language can we do this with other animals to slow down or speed up their language? Can we speed up the whale language, make it sound like birds, play that back to birds, and will they understand it? That kind of thing. I'm thinking, can we have a universal communicator for interspecies communication by simply altering the pitch and the time, or what you call the time signature, I guess you might say, the interval, not between the sounds, but the length of the notes. Essentially, you're extending the notes far further than they were originally in the case of birds. So 20, if it was a quarter note, it would be 20 times that, whenever that works out.
Yeah, they just call it elongation, right? You're slowing down the pitch so it's longer. The song lasts longer because you're slowing it down, right? Mm-hmm. Well, you know, it's an assumption to assume maybe that they don't communicate with each other.
Well, they might.
Probably, you're right, they don't.
Seagulls might communicate.
But we don't know. Just because we don't hear it doesn't mean that they don't. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
necessarily.
But doing this, it makes it a common language for, like, we can understand it. When you hear a whale sound, for example, it evokes certain emotions. You can tell almost what they're talking about through their sounds. They have a distinct language, and the research scientists know what certain sounds mean and how they communicate with each other and all that kind of thing. But you can feel it. You feel it, as an emotion inside. And what if the birds are feeling a similar emotion from that sound, but they're just feeling it really quickly? Like they go through bing, 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 bing is their emotions, but the whales go, they draw it out. And if you think about the conditions that both of these animals are under, the ocean environment is much more dense than our atmosphere, for example. So birds, when they fly, their wings are moving quickly. Whales, when they move through the ocean, they're moving much slower and more sort of gracefully or something, elegantly through the ocean. But what if we sped up the whale movements by 20 times? Would they look like flying birds then? Or if we slowed down the birds by 20 times to the same vocal level as the whales, would the birds look like they were flying through the water, or like more like a manta ray or some sort of whale or other sea animal? So it just occurred to me that, you know, if we can do this with birds and whales, and, you know, obviously dolphins have their own language that we can even communicate with through humans and so on. And I'm just thinking, what about other, you know, throw in bears and, you know, flies and the insect world and so on. Do they all have a means of communicating with other species that we haven't really investigated so much, that because we never believed enough that we could actually do it through audio voice kind of, we knew that there's an interconnection, you know, people have feelings for different animals and the animals seem to have feelings back and that kind of thing. But I don't think we've investigated the cross-species communication. Maybe there hasn't been a need for it before. Maybe there is a need now. Maybe it's time for the species of this planet, no matter if you're the human species or the animals of various sorts or fish or whatever, we're all evolving. And maybe it's time for more communication, because that's possibly part of the evolution that's going on, to be more aware of the other levels next to you or close to you. So it's kind of fun anyway. And the next class, I think we're going to take whale sounds and speed them up and see if they sound like birds. We'll see how that goes.
Rick, it has happened. The communication has happened. We have been in enough meeting where we read each other's thoughts.
Yes, and that's something that's not uncommon through history and so on as well. But I think that it's becoming common for the common person now to accept this, that yes, I can essentially read someone else's thoughts. I know what's going on in their head, you might say, or something. When you encounter someone, it could be someone you know well, or it could be just a total stranger, but you know their thoughts somehow. You can just, you know, you grok it. It's something that if you're paying attention, that you can develop that, or some people might accidentally do it, or some might do it and not know that they're actually doing it. They call them intuitive people or strange people or something like that, because but now it's not strange. Now it's becoming more and more normal. And I think that is the normal way in the universe, is to read the thoughts of others. Of course you would. And then, you know, the aliens come to planet Earth and they go, whoa, you mean you guys can't read each other's thoughts? Well, how do you get along with each other and know what the other person needs and wants and so on? And yeah, okay, maybe that is the cause of our problem on this planet, is we're not consciously paying attention to the thoughts of others.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, like the little 8-year-old girl saying to her daddy, Daddy, the MagRav unit's talking to you. Why aren't you hearing it? It's yelling at you. Why aren't you listening?
Yeah.
You know? Can I read something from Paul Hindemith's book? There's a couple of names for this book. It's The Nature of Musical Tones, or The Craft of Musical Composition. But I want to read something here from this, if I can here. See if I find it. Okay. He's talking about using the harmonics to get our scales that we use, our 12-note scales and all this stuff. He's talking about how we come up with them, right? But he's talking about does not all this seem like a distant echo of the musica mundana of the ancients, those harmonies of the spheres that reigned above both earthly types of music and actually talking about vocal music and instrumental music? those harmonies so perfect that the inadequate sense organs of men could not perceive them, needing no realization in sound, since the ratios of numbers that underlie all movements and all sound are more to the reflecting spirit than the external part of music, sound, through which it becomes profaned and is brought within the sphere of man's perceptions, right? He's saying, you know, thinking of music at the sound level is a profanity compared to the actual harmonics, those ratios of the perfect harmony of the spheres, you know? And, you know, if Mr. Keshe, when Nicholas was first doing his presentation on the Flower of Life, Mr. Keshe's first explanation, first he talked about this, but then later he talked about the water going in the drain and splashing out. But he talked about, think of a metal ball against a grinding wheel, those sparks shooting off. When you have this phenomenon that in the 19th century, they would have called it sympathetic vibration and harmonic resonance. Now, this came up in a question you read last Knowledge Seekers Workshop, yeah? Harmonic resonance, when you have two entities linked, it's not a field strength to field strength interaction. It's actually a frequency to frequency interaction, because I can have a steel string interacting with a nylon string and I'll have a magnetic field interaction. So it's not the field strength itself, it's one of the parameters of the field strength. And this is something we're going to have to start really thinking about, not just a field strength. That works for gradients to create rotation in the fields. We need that to get our spaceship. We need high rotation. So that's the paramount thing. But now for navigation and for other levels of understanding, we're going to have to look more deeply into what a field is. It's layers of, you know, with gaps, certain frequencies of each pitches, you know, interacting. So there's more to it than just a field strength. The field strength, because again, what's the field strength of hydrogen? Well, at which level? To us, to the entities up there, they have two different hydrogens, completely different field strengths, right? So, you know, you have to start thinking more. Oh, I was wanting to come to a point that I lost I lost my train of thought about something. Okay. The harmonic resonance. The thing about harmonic resonance, why it's such an inadequate thing, is that poking a hole into the universe and creating the feedback or the splashing out of the fields that creates the entity. That's the essence of creation. And that happens. And the grinding of the wheel shows those sparks coming out. That's what's happening. So it makes sound. It creates light. At every skin cell is scraping against the environment. You're actually giving off light and you're creating sound every second of every day, right? You are a star. We don't see the glowing, but you actually do. You see a manifestation of it at certain, because our eyes are only tuned to certain frequencies. So we only see certain things. To another entity, we are glowing like a sun because that's what they see. They see the white light. We see the prisms of it, right? But we're actually glowing. We're giving off light, we're giving off sound, and we're creating a scraping of the fields, and there's sparks coming off every second of every day. And here's the thing, Mr. Keshe actually said this: the soul is the composer and conducting the orchestra of the physicality. I'm not sure the exact quote, every second of every day from the point of inception, right? There's it's a scraping of the fields at every level. That's scraping. When the fields go in, they poke that hole into the universe and they create that vortex. And it's all about scraping of fields, as strange as it sounds. That's what's happening, right? We're giving off light and heat and sound. Even if we don't hear it necessarily, it's there. Huh? Anyway, I just want to bring that.
Thank you. Always love your point of view there, Mario. Thank you for your perspectives. Okay, anybody else want to weigh in here? We've got some things in the chat. I'm not sure if we need to bring these up or...
Rick, I would like to add a little bit to the communication part. The communication that we do as human beings are at the physical field strength level. Now, as part of the Keshe Foundation activity, we are talking about soul level field strength in doing some of the things we do. Similarly, there is the emotional level field strength, which is commonly known as telepathy. So we can switch to different field strength in terms of communication. And the range of communication and the scope of the communication goes up considerably as we switch the field strength. So what we feel in our meeting is more in the emotional range. And, you know, if you attend enough meeting with people speaking in different languages, and sometimes you can pick up what they're saying from just carefully observing what they're saying more than anything else. The soul level field strength is a different, again, a higher level field strength, and there the range is the end of the universe, perhaps. I mean, I don't know, but we, much like talking about electron or sounds, we tend to fall back on the physical range or physical octave, let's call it that, instead of the others that are higher field strength. So, and this is partly because we are so familiar with electricity and sound, but we may be as capable in this other ranges, emotional or soul level, as we engage ourselves in these areas. We can bring the necessary changes, be it world peace, politicians acting on behalf of world peace, and so forth. But you, as a member of the core team, know very well how to do this soul level field strength. Why not do it at the emotional level as well? So all of these are available maybe to us, and we may be able to communicate with dolphins instead of trying to translate dolphins or whales language. We are maybe quite capable of communicating with birds and dolphins. We just may have to just switch to the emotional field strength. We're not used to it, but why not? And other people, perhaps outside the planetary sphere, may be capable of doing that as well. So these are just some of the thoughts I have. Some of these I mean, Rick, you practice it. I mean, to some extent, I have done it too. And in communicating with people from other languages, and I have friends in languages that they don't speak very good English, or I don't speak their language, and we have been able to communicate. I have tested some of these ideas actually. And it's actually quite interesting to try to not translate the language, but see how much one can pick up. But sometimes it's surprisingly not that difficult. Anyway, some thoughts of how different field strength may be used for things other than, as Mark was saying, flying or creating motion or whatever, but this kind of communication. So anyway, some of my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, very good, Mashfaq. Thank you. Anybody else with some thoughts you would like to put out at this time?
Well, some thoughts about the homopolar motor thing. So, if I understand well, it is made of a magnet and made of a closed loop, which creates a field.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a magnet, but a magnetic field, actually, to be...
Okay. The specific construction which you used to show us with that battery and that little round magnet, that's I'm talking about.
Yep.
So has anybody thought about how to make it in such a way for the coil to stand in place and the magnet to rotate?
Yeah, I've done that. I've demonstrated that before. You can, in fact, I could probably do it right now.
And without the current going through the magnet.
Oh, well, that's a different stipulation.
Yeah, is it need to close the electric circuit through the magnet, or can you close it anywhere around?
Well, like, put the thing off of here. For example, if we have the same deal, instead of rotating this, which you could see from before, was like that. Oops, let me make it a little better there. So that's the rotation. You can do it another way, which is to invert everything. And it's
Using a suspension, a good suspension there. Yes.
The batteries dead is why it won't work. But once it gets going, it can actually go really fast, and it's starting to rotate there a little bit. You can see it there. So when everything's set up just right, and you put a little drop of oil on there, helps on that bearing surface. There's a lot of resistance to kind of get it going, but you get the idea that it's got the possibility for rotating the magnet and the current source rather than the conductor, which has its own magnetic field still. So, or you can have both going at the same time. I've had it on the table where one is going one direction, and sometimes the magnet, when it's powerful enough, will start going in the opposite direction kind of thing. So they'll both be counter-rotating. That's what they would tend to do.
Yeah. I had the reason why I said specifically not to close the circuit through the magnet. I think it's not important to close the circuit through the magnet. You can close it anywhere. We were kids, and we have been puzzled with my friend on the street for some small discovery. Anyway, at a young age, we played with wires, transistors, electronics, and so on. And some kids on the street captured a fallen meteorological balloon.
Oh, yeah?
It had all made in Russia components. And the radio part, it was taken by a physics professor who was radio amateur and so on. And my friend got a bit which was very interesting. It was a small motor which had no collector. So it was no thing to deal with electric currents through moving parts. It had a coil on an armature, and between the poles of the armature, the rotor was made of a magnet, a permanent magnet. And it was spinning only on one direction, never on the other, even if you reversed the voltage.
Mm.
And that was a big technical puzzle for us. But it was so interesting. And I think understanding how you make a magnet which possesses magnetic fields and how you make to rotate through the fields, it may give more understanding about the creation of motion.
Yeah, agreed. Just playing with magnets, and in fact, just playing with that that simple heart device that I show so much has been mind-blowing to me to see it and play with it and actually understand that it's so simple. I never realized that motion could be created so simply. It's a mind blower. Because we have so many complicated motors in our society, and all these brushes and commutators and sophisticated circuits and so on. And you get kind of used to that mentality as a growing lad, or at least I did. And I was totally surprised and shocked to find the homopolar motor. Okay, so you're showing a
What I'm remembering, it's not at scale, but it's basically the principle. It was very similar to that AC motor which is in the old disc players.
Mm-hmm.
It's very similar to that. So it had such an armature. It was a little different scale. It had a coil. It had a DC here. It worked well with 4.5 volts. And here it had a rotor which had a magnet, and of course it had some bearings and whatever. And this was this went to a mechanism, to a simple camshaft or something like this, with some program for instance, 1 minute to transmit the temperature, other minute to transmit the air pressure or whatever. Such a simple automation, which was not electronic but such electromechanic solution. So the point was that if you connected the battery in the right way, it was spinning smoothly. If you connected in reverse, it made a quarter spin or a half spin on the opposite direction, and then it stopped. We tried to figure out the polarization of the rotor because it was such a permanent magnet, and we had no such fancy tools. But we had only such a small compass or such a iron dust. And what we figured out, it was something, a distribution, which was uneven. So it was asymmetrical somehow. So the north and the south had the different sizes. This is all which we understood. But how it worked, we never could realize. We were not able to replicate. So that's why I asked, has somebody figured out to make a homopolar motor? This is a homopolar motor. And you see, it's no commutation on the coil. It's not changing position. It's just feeding with a DC. So it gives here a kind of field, a magnetic field here. And in that field, this thing is just spinning happily until it's fed.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it doesn't have contact on it's just magnetic, then usually we'd need an AC or some sort of maybe intermittent DC or something in order to cause some sort of motion.
So that's why it was amazing. We never have seen such a thing, but it was the old Russian meteorological technology.
Yeah, it could have some special qualities. A lot of the early stuff has been lost to us in a way, or at least forgotten about. Some things that were quite amazing and could have led to more discoveries were lost by the wayside. Certain types of bulbs, for example, evacuated bulbs when they were doing work in the stereo systems and TV and radio and all that. They had bulbs in the old days, and they could do a lot of amazing things with bulbs. But then they suddenly got phased out when miniaturization came in and transistors started up. And then all of a sudden bulbs were lost, and we came into the digital age, and only recently have some stereo people have gone back to bulbs for their rich quality and the way they transform the sound.
It really gives a different sound. I remember once a friend who was electronic engineer and hobbyist, with a big hobby for electronics, once said, "Would you like to hear a real electronic organ? Come down into the cellar." So he had an electronic organ, but made with valves. And that sounded like a church organ. No transistor version was able to do that. And it comes due to the kind of distortion. So valves have a bigger distortion in proportion than transistors, but the transistors make the distortion on, I don't remember well, on maybe on the odd harmonics or whatever, but it makes on certain harmonics, and that's why it makes it sound completely different.
And by valve, you mean like the vacuum tubes that they use to...
Yes, the vacuum tubes.
Or you are vacuum...
Yes. They are big ones, like such big potatoes.
Big potatoes.
Yes.
Some of the big ones,
yeah, you know, I'm a guitar player. And even now with digital, I have digital amp now that's pretty good, but vacuum tubes you can't beat. And even in the most sophisticated studios now, they have little preamps for the vocals or for whatever, which are vacuum tubes. Yeah, because you can't beat that sound.
It sounds different. It makes the sound having more grease, more balls, and so on, so on, so.
They're a lot better now at replicating that sound with the digital, because they can analyze it. And it's oddly enough, it's the even numbered harmonics that are the distortion ones. The odd ones are the smoother sound, and it's the even numbered harmonics that create the distortion guitar sounds, strangely. Yeah. But
thank you for the addition. It took many decades since I studied that subject, and my memory is not that old one.
No, it's a strange thing why the even numbered harmonics would be the ones that give you the heavy metal distortion sound as opposed to the odd number harmonics, you know. But again, that's the timbre. That's timbre, which of the harmonics are present, and it's a matter of amplitude. If you decrease the amplitude of some of the harmonics and increase the amplitude of other harmonics, this is what they did with the first synthesizers. They would analyze the Fourier spectral analysis of a trumpet playing a note A, and they see which of the harmonics are present, because some of them are being muted, is the way we think of it. They're not present. So you have some of the harmonics are present and some of them are not. This is the gaps in the layers of the fields. No different. It's literally the same as hydrogen, right? It's literally the same thing. It's the same phenomenon. There's only one physics in the universe, right? It's just different behaviors at different, and this is where humans get screwed up, is we see the different behaviors and we think, oh, these are different things. But it's not. You take the same spectral analysis and change the harmonics. It sounds like a flute, sounds like a guitar, sounds like a whatever, right? And here's the thing. I want to bring this up because it came up back about the teaching about the herpes. When somebody was talking about how a fella came up with that microscope, he could measure the pitch of the pathogen, right? And he could match that pitch and then neutralize. I don't think he's actually destroying it. I'm not sure what's going on with that, cracking it like a crystal.
That wasn't actually his main focus. That was some of the subsequent, the people that took what they thought was an ultimate pitch or an ultimate frequency and just ran it through and ran a machine on that. He was doing it in order to, I think, be able to actually view the entities, so he would amplify them at their natural frequency, and that's how they
but he needed to be able to see the thing, and then he could measure its frequency, probably by its size, I think, something like that. And then by replicating that frequency, he would neutralize the virus in the person's body or whatever, right? Okay, when Mr. Keshe was saying that, he said, okay, but we have more advanced tools. It's exactly the same thing as looking at, let's say, a trumpet sound, and the way the synthesizer guys replicated that timbre by muting certain harmonics and creating the trumpet sound. What we can do now is do what the synthesizer guys came up with later, is they sample the trumpet. Because in other words, you record it, you just record it, and now you can record it on every pitch. Now you can play it, and it's actually much more accurate because the timbre slightly changes when it goes up, when it goes down, and so on, right? What we can do is make a Gantz of it. So we don't need to know what the frequency is. We don't need to see it in a microscope. We can just make a Gantz of the herpes. Now you have an amplified energy package, and you can pick your pain pack. So it's literally sampling it. And we can make a Gantz of anything. So now it's literally the same thing as the synthesizer guys were doing. He was doing it by, you have to know what its frequency is, so you have to be able to measure it. Well, that's great if you can do that, but we don't need to do that anymore. We don't need to know what's the frequency of the herpes virus. Who cares? Sample it, play it back, take care of the problem, right? It's literally the same thing. And funny thing is, the guy who was talking about that was a doctor who's a Keshe Foundation guy, and he was treating it like it's two different things. Oh, one's the matter level thing with the frequency, and the other is the Gans level plasma thing, like it's two different things. See, we separate. We see two different behaviors, and we think that they're two different things, right? Our perceptions are screwing us up. No, it's the same thing. You're just sampling it. What are you doing? When you put the paint patch on there, you're just playing back that pitch. Only you're playing the entire spectrum of its actual field, so you're actually nailing it better, more advanced, but the same, not a different thing. One of them's a matter level, he was saying, and the other is a plasma phenomenon. No, there is no matter level thing. It's a plasma. They're both plasmas, right? It's just different ways of doing the same thing, right? But
I think it's different, though, compared to the sampling that we do in the amplifiers. The even harmonics are not bad in the sense that even harmonics, there is a nonlinear interaction, which is, you are essentially getting into the gravitational magnetical interaction in the nonlinear domain. And nonlinear, our mathematics that we are taught in the schools are not very good at nonlinear systems. So you can analyze it up to a point. And with digital sampling, sampling always introduces distortion. So the analog systems such as vacuum tubes that are used in amplifiers is much better than even today's high-speed digital sampling that we use using computer technology. So there is a significant difference between analog amplifier versus digital systems.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But when we're talking about Gans materials and
completely different again, which is again
it's the same. My meaning is it's the same. It's the same phenomenon, not a different phenomenon. It's the same phenomenon. Just we can actually sample the actual timbre of it exactly because we're making a Gans of it. So it's better than synthesizer guys when they sample it. Even then, you're sampling a particular guy's. Miles Davis made a joke about it. He said, well, the problem with the sampling is they use a white trumpet player. You know, it's who's playing it, so, the best digital equipment is, you're right, it's not adequate, but we have better than digital equipment. We have Gans material. This is at another level. That's what Mr. Keshe was saying. We have much more advanced tools. We can literally sample the herpes virus, literally, the entire structure of it, right? By making a Gans of it. Yeah, so it's better than the synthesizer makers can do, right? But it's the same principle. That's my point. It's replicating the harmonic overtone series of that particular instrument, right? And there's a difference in the range. And a certain range, there'll be certain harmonics that come up, and a higher range, there's different ones. A different player, a different trumpet will all have their own characteristics. So when somebody has a herpes, if you take their herpes, a sample of the lesion, and you make a Gans of it, it's their herpes literally. So it's a perfect replica. It's not close, like the digital synthesizers are close, but not quite. Close enough. You say, oh yeah, it sounds like a trumpet or whatever, but it's not the same as having a real trumpet player. But with the Gans, it's literally the virus itself. So, but even then, you don't have to be that exact about it. I mean, even with the cancers, the guys are taking the blood tests and seeing, okay, you have this certain metal. So you make a Gans of that metal. It doesn't have to be the exact same thing, close enough. Close enough, it'll still work, right? Even the outer frequency of when the guy's doing it, when he's replicating the frequency, he's not getting the exact timbre, but close enough. and it still works. So, you know, I mean, there's a lot of leeway, but my point is there's only one phenomenon. It's not a matter level and a plasma level. One guy's using sound or light frequencies, and therefore it's not plasma. No, sound is plasma, light is plasma, gases are plasma, everything's plasma. It's right.
Well,
so
we get into slippery area there because everything's plasma if that's what you see. It's sort of the old joke is what you see is what you get. If you can see plasma in everything, then you're at the plasma level. But if you can see the GANs and everything, like sometimes I go into the store, to this superstore, and aisles of the frozen foods and all these packages, I see all these Ganses of different kinds. I just see Gans. I have Gans vision, and I can't see it as just matter stuff or as something to enjoy. It's just different colored and different textured Ganses of all kinds. And it's
that's what they are, actually.
Well,
that is what they are.
Or you could say that they're plasmas. You could have plasma vision and see everything in terms of plasmatic field entities, self-contained Coulomb barrier plasmatic entities, and one could go beyond that, and so on. So others might just see hamburger, yum. What GANs, what nano, what spiritual, what none of that, and just go for the pure matter level stuff because that's what they're interested in. So, you know, Mr. Keshe has laid this out before, that humans fall into these different general categories, ranging from the matter level through the nano, the GANs, the plasma, and finally the plasma manipulator was the word that came out at that time, which is the sort of the king of plasma, the being able to control the plasma, to have it interact with it as part of the universe and so on. So all these different levels, and that we can be at different levels and go back to the previous level if we wish. If we want to run reactors that are matter level at a certain point, we do that, and maybe we don't need that anymore and we skip a level up and look at it as the Ganses, and it's self-rotating, doesn't need the reactor. Then maybe we go back and, oh, well, this time I'm going to do a disk reactor, and it's still going to be matter level, but it's going to be different than the sphere reactors. And you learn from that and go up again to the next level and so on and so forth. And always trying to go to the upper levels of working with fields and the plasmas and that level, because that's really the higher game of it all. But knowing that sometimes we involuntarily or voluntarily, depending, descend onto the lower levels in order to experience or re-experience some of the things of that we need to relearn again, or we may be there to teach others how to elevate to the next level. So there's different job categories that kind of show up if you were to look at things that way. My opinion. Any other opinions of levels? Well, we're coming up on the 4-hour mark here. Do we have any other things to bring up that would be interesting for this show?
Hey, Rick, can I ask a question? Rick, could you go into briefly how to make a GANs of a metal?
The GANs of a metal?
Yeah.
Such as any particular metal, or just...
Just in general, or wood even? Would that be the same process?
Pardon me, would what be?
With wood, would that be the same process?
With wood?
GANs of wood?
Anybody got any ideas on that?
Well, we do it all the time with zinc. I mean, you can make GANs of gold and GANs of zinc. You can make GANs of anything, actually, right? I mean, GANs of wood, the GANs of banana.
CO2 GANs, actually, even.
Actually, yeah. Those are technically metals, aren't they?
And people do, well, what other metals do we, well, people have made GANs of
lead.
Heavy metals, yeah, lead, and had lots of bad
aluminum.
That one.
Yeah, well.
For most people, don't go with the GANs of lead. It's had people have headaches, and they've had to walk around the container in their lab because it bothers them so much. Their leg twitches when they walk by it. Maybe not such a good idea to. But, you know, there might be certain instances when you need such a strong gradient, and that's maybe true of certain things, but you have to be careful of
well, you can also, if I can add this, you can also make your CO2 GANs, but put a banana on top of the container. You will get the fields of the banana in there. Of course, it's mixed with the CO2, but you have a GANs of banana, literally. Or whatever, you know, iron, a piece of wood, whatever you put on top of the container, those fields will be transferred there. It won't be a GANs of only that, but you never get a pure GANs of anything anyway, ever. I mean, no matter two zinc, you know, you're going to get mostly zinc, but you're going to get the plastic, you're going to get the whatever, you're going to get everything in there as in the environment. You can't help it. It's just a proportion thing, yeah.
Yeah, so
so
you can restrict certain things, but you're right. It's going to be a broad spectrum sort of a situation, at least for most people in a non-clinical lab kind of configuration. Even then, probably the more they try to keep the extraneous factors out, the more they find their way in. Yeah, it's been mentioned here. I mean, just making the GANs itself, and you include substances when you're making the CO2 GANs, for example, and you put the substances in while you're making it, then that can end up being in the GANs, and GANs in being part of all that. So it's depending on what you want to do, and people have used wood bits and pieces for making GANs out of various types of wood and types of especially live species of wood, but and also the roots. It came up recently about using the part between the root and the stalk of the tree in order, that's where the essence is, or the prime prime parts, the soul of the tree.
The general approach to nano-coating metal, creating GANs, would be nano-coat the same metal and use two plates, one nano-coated, one non-nano-coated. That's the general approach for making metal GANs, but metal does not work with putting it on top of CO2. But you can use the general approach. I have done gold, silver, lead, a few others.
That's a good point. Yeah. The plate, plate plus nano plate technique. Mm-hmm.
That works very well with metal, but CO2 and metal does not work because it doesn't couple with the amino acid. So live material like branches and bananas, fruits work with CO2, and especially if you make CO2 and also amino acids, you know, make a bottle with CO2 and amino acids surrounding it, and then it's very easy to make those, capture those fields. But I don't know whether you can get GANs, but you can capture the fields and you can taste various food, and I've tested it. So, but metal is a little different. You don't get the metal taste. I have never been able to find metal taste by putting metal with those kind of arrangements. So that's been my practical experience. So anyway, that may help.
Yeah. So part of it is, what are you trying to make? Why do you want to make it? And what's your intention when you set out with your box to create certain, why would you want to make GANs of certain metals and so on and so forth? What's the reasoning? It's got to be some ideas behind it, other than, I wonder what it would be like to make who knows what. All right, any other comments here? You see, Jay wants a magnetic rake for his leaves. There you go, to rake up leaves. There's a magnet for leaves. Think we can make that? Possibly. There's a magnet for wood and a magnet for everything else. Okay, any other comments, or should we shut things down here? Coming up in 4 hours. I don't want to go over 4 hours because the magic fairies don't like that in the broadcast. I see I have one person that's been a panelist here. I didn't notice you there, Carlos. You there was an attendee. You're now a panelist and have 3 seconds to speak. Too late. Okay, well, we've covered a lot of various topics here today. It's very interesting, and thank you for allowing me to rant and rave about some of my favorites. You see, I was going to put in another link here to my favorite Halloween device. There we go. I got the link. I'll put the link in the chats here. And this is called the Spooky, because it's Halloween, Spooky Tesla Spirit Radio. And this is a video I did, let's see when it was here. 2009, oh, October 25th, 2009. So 9 years ago, just about right now. 9 years, wow, it's been 9 years since that. So this is, I'll just post it here and try to put it in the other chats. Halloween special, Spooky Tesla Spirit Radio. This is me showing a series of 7 experiments with the Spooky Tesla Spirit Radio, which is a non-powered crystal radio circuit built in a jam jar. And I show it doing things like detecting lightning and making voice phenomena, interacting with all forms of light, creating music and sound effects, reading a computer screen, acting as a microphone, and detecting radio frequency pulses, and through the computer sound port. So those that are into that kind of thing, even if you aren't, you might find it fun. It's amazing what a basic crystal radio circuit, which is the most basic of all circuits, which I like basic and simple things. That's why I like the Tesla turbine idea and the Lorentz force homopolar motor, and this is like another one. The crystal radio circuit is a multi-purpose, good for literally hundreds of different purposes circuitry. So there you go in the chat there, and let me put it in the live stream. And let me see if I can get it into YouTube as well. Oh. Yeah, I think I can do it there now. Let's try it. There, that should go through. YouTube. And maybe even Facebook. I can try that if I can get it to work there. Sorry, I've been missing the comments on Facebook there. I don't know if there have been any actually. Hi. And there you go. That's your little Halloween bonus for today from the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group. And so the idea is go out and have fun and create, I think. And that's got to be good advice for myself as far as others as well. Go forth, create, and have fun. Thou shalt have fun. That's the 25th commandment from Rick. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap things for today. So once again, thanks everybody for attending. And if you got some good experiments out there, please try to get them into the Plasma Scientific Journal format. You can look that up on the Keshe Foundation site, and the journal is the correct way nowadays for recording the information so that others can access it, and that we can collate the data and have similar experiments related to each other, and see what the effects are, and start having a database for all of that information. Okay, that's a plug for that, and we'll see you all at the Knowledge Seekers Workshop at 9:00 a.m. Central European Time, not Central European Summer Time, but the Central European Time. So they've had a change, a 1 hour change in Europe a few days ago. So people should be aware of that. If you're tuning in from other countries, it might be an hour later than you expect, for example. And use your universal decoder rings to figure that one out. Universal time app or whatever you got that can determine your time compared to the Central European time. And I hear they're going to do away with Central European time with that time change thing that they do there. And they'll probably do away with the whole savings time thing around the world shortly as well, hopefully. Okay. Very good, everyone. This is Rick signing out. Thanks for joining me at the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group tonight. It's a lot of fun. And we'll see you next time around. And hopefully I'll get my disc cut out there in the background and get some action happening in various different experiments that need to get done here. I hope you can get some experiments done as well and bring them here next time. It's best to let me know before the show, if you can, of what you'd like to show, and give me an idea, and we can check it and make sure it doesn't have copyright issues and that kind of thing. But if we have to, we kind of jam it in as well. What other advice can I give? Don't take rides from strangers. Don't stare at the sun unless you know what you're doing. Okay, that's it. I'm getting really crazy now. All right, so let me do the shutdown sequence. 3, 2, 1, we shut down live stream. Post that, we shut down recording.